Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. I actually was kind of just waiting for work to start for the day, so while I'm waiting for something decent to go and do, I figured I'd take a little bit of a second here to talk about one of those topics that comes up a lot. Namely, when you hear recommendations for which version of Tactics Ogre to start with, oftentimes you will hear recommendations for the PSP version. Now, this can oftentimes be very confusing for newer players who may look at this whole thing and think, this is an older version, or potentially might look at it and hear, hey, look, this technically had a whole bunch of more buttons to press. This clearly must be the more fleshed out version. And so, what I wanted to do here is just kind of cover as many random topics as immediately come to mind as far as things that get misremembered about the PSP version, because frankly, it's one of these cases of a game that is designed so weird that usually whenever somebody's talking about it, they'll swear certain things are true or that they remember using something all the dang time, when the reality might actually be a lot more different than you might expect. So, to that end, let's go ahead and we'll just kind of cover these in no particular order. Probably a good place to start to give you an idea of the kinds of stuff that that ends up coming up here is going to be cross-classing. There's a lot of folks that will tell you that they swear that they could cross-class in this game, that it was something that you could do all the time. And the thing was, there's certain situations where certain skills would potentially go and potentially be cross-classable, but not really. And oftentimes, this actually was more of a annoying complication than it actually was a fun feature to interact with. So, for example, that's why we have Knight Ozma up here. I guess minor spoiler for folks that didn't know, there's kind of hidden characters that you can go and recruit. Now, in this particular case, Ozma is an absolute powerhouse in all versions of this game. However, in this one in particular, she interacted very funny with the mechanics. Namely, when it came to the Knight Commander class, it's one of few that's able to actually dual wield. Now, you might say, okay, so you just go give her double attack right from the get-go, right? The funny part is, she's the only class that can't naturally learn dual wield actually, I guess technically four classes that can dual wield. Technically, the Lord is on that list as well, but the Lord is an exception in all ways anyway. So, as far as these guys go, the Ninja learns it naturally, the Ranger learns it naturally, but when it comes to the Knight Commander and the Lord, like in the Lord's case, it's expected, he's carrying in all the stuff he learned from other classes, but when it comes to the Knight Commander, it's basically the one time you'd want to switch her out of Knight Commander to go get access to double attack. The thing is, though, this leads to a funny little quirk. See, when it comes to the Knight Commander, when you get her, you don't get extra class marks. You just get her as the Knight Commander. I believe in Reborn you actually do get extra class marks for her, though it's also no longer needed either. But as far as the dual wielding on her, you specifically have to change her out of her unique class and then go out of your way to figure out where on Earth you're supposed to get another Knight Commander class mark. Now, off the top of your head, I want you to take a little bit of a second and think, how would you go about that? Would you, for example, track down one of those moments in the story, where she might be killed and maybe kill her for it? Maybe, but not normally. See, the thing is, in order to get access to a Knight Commander class marks, there's two things that can be done to make this happen. See, there were a lot of things that they locked away behind a lot of arbitrary walls. And so one of these was the level 30 wall. Now, this wasn't always level 30, but there were just a lot of situations where the game scaled up to a sort of pseudo New Game Plus mode. It's worth mentioning that this is different from the actual New Game Plus mode that happens once you unlock Coda. See, the weird part was, the game would scale up, but certain things would change in one mode and wouldn't change in another mode. And so in this case, if, for example, you were playing the game normally and you achieved New Game Plus type levels on your characters, and you killed a Knight Commander, then you would have a small chance to drop that mark. However, if you were playing the game normally and killed any other Knight Commander, if your levels were, say, below 30 or so, sometimes as low as 25, but typically below 30, you would no longer have a chance for that drop to happen, even from those same enemies. And this actually includes the ability to steal it as well, because there's one enemy that can actually have the Knight Commander mark stolen, and it's a zombified Templar that only shows up in Chapter 4. Now, there's a group of Templars, but it's specifically, I believe, 2 of the 3 of them that can actually drop this class mark. The complication of this whole thing is that you then have to train up a rogue, which many further misremember as being able to steal equipment. Technically, yes, but not in the way you're thinking. Anyway, so in this case, you would have to train up this rogue. They have to have their steal up at rank, I believe, 3 or so. Let's go see where our thief is in this particular playthrough. Did I even have one for this particular playthrough? God, I don't even remember. It's been such a long time. Here, is this the guy that had it? I don't believe this was the guy that did it. No, this was a different playthrough I'm thinking of. Anyway, so in order to get access to this class mark, you had to get their steal to rank 3 or 4 or so, and you had to specifically track down that one zombified Templar. Where do you find a zombified Templar? Well, the thing is, they don't normally pop up, but after Heim falls, there will be, or actually, was it Barnisha? I don't know, whatever, one of those. They're just going to be wandering around in one of the random battles. And that's going to be the one right over here, the Lambus Hill. The Venessen Way. Yeah, it goes to show you. Years and years upon going and playing this thing, and I still keep forgetting stuff randomly. Anyway, so they're going to be showing up in the Venessen Way, right? The thing is, it is a rare spawn, and it can only happen when it's raining. So this means that you have to, more than likely, go to one of these maps over here, trigger a random battle, use a couple of weather-ruining items to then force it to be extremely rainy, and then for the next few days you will have a chance for it to spawn on the Venessen Way. You'll know because this is one of the few cases where you're spawning from the right side of the map instead of the bottom. Very unusual type of situation there. I've shown this in a few videos before, but this is just an idea of how the quote-unquote cross-classing actually worked in this one. It's never the kinds of stuff that people want it to be, like if it's a Final Fantasy Tactics or a Felseal or something like that, where you learn something cool as one class and then that just carries with you. That is your thing that you brought with you to all of these different situations, right? You'd think that it would be one of these career path kind of skills, but realistically that's not the case. This is further exemplified with something like the passives, for example. Because on paper, this is going to be something that you would just simply learn and it'll carry with you and they can't take it away from you because most classes can learn Strengthen. Except that's the thing. Every class had a kind of arbitrary limitation on how many stacks of this thing you could carry. So for example, some classes could learn up to 2, some could learn up to 1, 3, 4, etc. But you'll notice something else. Every class also that can use it can also learn it. But on top of that, the actual differences between when they can learn it is typically only a couple of levels. It's not actually that big of a deal that they can't just go learn it themselves. So why would they switch to this other class and then switch back, essentially using 2 class marks of potentially a class that they can't switch back into in order to make this happen? This was the problem with this system. This is one of those constant annoyances that would come up in this one, because there's stuff that you'd swear you could do when in reality you couldn't. So how many people that played Reborn loved, for example, using the parry and deflect warlock, having their life saved at the last second from a random tremendous shot, or seeing a big heavy hit coming from a boss and they just deflect it away with their dagger, and it looks pretty badass, right? That's the thing. People would swear that you could do this back in PSP too, but you can't. See, back in PSP, they could still use daggers. In fact, I kind of feel that this was probably them trying to reach out to fans of Knight of Lotus at the time. Because in Knight of Lotus, warlocks were given access to swords, and they were given spell sword abilities. This is more than likely, well, actually not even more than likely, this is directly why we see abilities like Baron Soul, as well as the actual various types of one-handed swords that are given to warlocks in the One Vision mod. Where it was just a really cool feature to see them, be this kind of spell sword type archetype. So in this version, they were given access to daggers, but not all daggers. Just like in Reborn, because I did see someone try and make the argument that they limited the kinds of daggers that they could use in Reborn. This wasn't true. There were essentially just different daggers that they could use, but for the most part, it was the Balder, it was the Damask, it was the Sticker, and it was the Cursed Dagger. And realistically, once you got access to the Cursed Dagger, if you knew how to use the Cursed Dagger, if you knew how to use any of the cursed weapons, realistically, weapon selection was no longer a problem for you. Anybody could one-shot anything with a cursed weapon if used correctly. That's not anything particularly special, but they were given access to a very specific subset of daggers for various different potential theoretical reasons. So in this case, they were given access to the Damask Dagger, presumably as a way to stun something. So you might be thinking, okay, so they attack and they counterattack and they've got a chance to counter stun something. That's a cool self-defense weapon idea, but they can't learn counter. Okay, so, they're going to go and they're going to seek out undead stuff to kill with this dagger. Kind of. It's just that their physical stats are so freaking low that realistically they're still only gonna kind of maybe occasionally have an opening to kill like a ghost or something. Realistically, this is just a way to boost their intelligence slightly while also hopefully having a chance to kill off a ghost or something in Palace of the Dead. This is a pure desperation weapon. Okay, so that's not great, but surely they can parry or deflect, right? I'm sorry, but no, they can't do that either. They can't parry or reflect or anything cool. They don't get access to any of that. None of the spellcasters do. With an exception to the princess, but she's got access to all kinds of melee weapons and stuff anyway. So that was the weird part about this. Like, there were so many situations where a class would have access to something, but then also really would not have much to do with it. So yeah, in this particular case, parry and deflect were essentially just merged into one skill, so you no longer had to predict which one of the two you were being attacked with. Overpower, which basically nobody would ever use, got reassigned to Vigorous Attack and Eagle Eye. But why is that? Like, let's go ahead and discuss that real quick. Why exactly was it that Overpower was taken away from the skill slots and added to something else? It lets you avoid parries. It's so useful, you guys. Because this thing previously had to be trained up. Now, for those that missed this particular interaction before, let's talk parry, deflect, and overpower real quick. So the funny part is, parry used to be kind of three different sections of three different skills. So you specifically had to pick parry or deflect. They exclusively worked on only basic melee or ranged attacks. And for anyone that could swear that this was something that you could do back in the SNES version, not intentionally. So, like, back in the SNES version, which I'm not going to re-roll stuff until it happens for the purpose of this video, but just know that there was a roughly 1% chance of any basic attack in the SNES version to just get blocked anyway, courtesy of a glitch. It's the same kind of rounding error that happened for something like the 1 in 256 glitch in Pokemon, where basically it was just, even if something has a 0% chance to be blocked, even if the hit is 100% chance, realistically it's like 99.9, and then it ignores the rest of it, and it's just like a 1% that's just kind of hanging out there. That's basically what was going on there. So technically, kind of with an extremely low chance to see it happen, technically, theoretically possible. I've seen it happen maybe twice, but yeah, it's just a glitch that can happen. The thing with Overpower, though, like, this sounds really cool on paper. Nullifies the parry skill. Okay, that's really cool. In reality, this actually means something else, that it actually also nullifies the deflect skill as well. But details. Anyway. So this ends up nullifying deflect as well. So what happens here is that Overpower is actually used the same way that parry and deflect are used. So, namely, a physical attack is used, but it's only a basic attack. So, like, finishers bypass the check for this entirely, or anything with a skill bypasses the check for this entirely. But parry and deflect, it'll specifically say, like, basic range attack, basic melee attack, right? And then it's something to the tune of about 5% of a chance per rank for this to go and be deflected. Now, this can be artificially boosted in this version by going and giving specific shields and stuff. This artificial boost was given to weapons instead, with different weapons being better at parrying in the Reborn version. Now, the thing is that this only has that percentage chance to even trigger in the first place. But each of these actually works differently. That parry and deflect actually are checked at different times, just kind of throughout the check there. So this basically boils down to the fact that even if you block, you can still train parry, but if you block, you don't train deflect. And this is really weird, because it effectively creates a situation where deflect is really the one that you really would want to either block or parry, because you might be thinking the effective grinding method here would be to give somebody extremely high evasion and then just keep peppering them with those attacks. But if they dodge it and there's no chance for the deflect to even trigger, then they can't really learn to deflect it in this case. They can for parrying for some reason, but not for deflection. So that's annoying in and of itself. But then when we get to overpower only triggers in the case that they have a rank that is higher than the parry or deflect of the respective thing, and then it's essentially rolling a separate chance minus the original skill chances to go and trigger in the first place. So presumably something along the lines of somebody has reflect rank 2, you have overpower rank 3, and now you're down to a 5% chance that this skill will be effective, and a 15% chance for it to trigger in the first place, or something along those lines. Yeah, it was weird. And it led to this awkward situation where the AI, due to the fact that they seemingly never got around to fine-tuning this stuff, would come in with good ranks of overpower and parry and deflect, and you were sitting there just like thumb up your butt the entire time, just wondering why you're constantly stuck at rank 1 for each of these potentially very useful skills, and they would just never end up triggering, and people would just throw them in the trash. Like, it's a really weird thing, and this is actually why, for example, with the mod, these are given a whole lot of additional skill ranks so that they're actually working right from the get-go. They're actually reliable enough to see something function. So, for example, somebody that's got the right piece of equipment, like the right combination of weapon and armor, realistically can see this going up to rank 3 or 4 right from the very beginning. One more little note just to bring this up here is that when it comes to the chances for these, the ranks are not the same between versions. So, like, the equivalent of a parry rank 3 would not be the equivalent of a parry rank 3 in Reborn. With parry rank 3 and this one being closer to 15%, and being closer to somewhere like 21% in Reborn. Also, one more thing I should probably mention just while we're on the screen right now is actually one of those other ones that's come up on a few Steam reviews before. Just kind of compare those two sprites next to each other. Like, there's a few folks that will dramatically yell about, like, "Oh my god, they killed the sprites, it's so terrible!" And, like, come on, just compare the two right next to each other. You know, is there really such a need for anything like that? No, they look fine. So, either way. Okay, I have to put one quick pause here because I actually did get something to go do. So let me go do that, and once I'm back, we'll continue on with this. Hello again! There was probably no pause in the video whatsoever, but I'm going to say hello again anyway. Okay, so next little funny thing is going to be the lobber. So this is a funny topic I've seen somebody yell at me in the comments for before on like 4 separate videos, and I'm not really sure why that was specifically the hill that they decided to go faceplant on, but all right, whatever. Anyway, so lobber, it's a skill in Reborn. It's an item in this version. It doesn't exist in SNES. Funny thing on the lobber though is many forget just how it worked in the PSP version, because the immediate thought that comes to mind is something like this, that you go over to your throne stuff and you see the lobber and it's like, oh look, they can use this on so many classes, they can use it on so many things, it's just, you know, it's the lobber, it lobs. But here's the thing, there's a lot of funny quirks to it being an item like this, rather than, well, actually the item, and specifically 3 items, rather than specifically it being, you know, just a skill. So, okay, first and foremost, when it comes to the lobber itself, it's actually 3 lobbers. It's the lobber plus 1, and the lobber plus 2. And the complications between all of these start to stretch out in funny directions pretty much immediately. So the lobber is the one that you get from the store. It's, you know, it's a pretty basic throwing thing, and you can use it on a lot of classes. Specifically, people would typically use this on the cleric, because in this version, the cleric didn't get access to meditate. Actually, weird side note on that, to the guy that was yelling at me that no, you could totally cross-class meditate on the clerics before, no, you couldn't. It's not a thing in this version. You could give them a meditate bonus on account of their hat, but they can't equip the skill to actually get that bonus, so no, you can't equip it and get the bonus off of just equipping the hat. That's not how it works. Anyway, so the lobber itself, if we look at the basic version, we notice a few changes since the Reborn version. For one thing, the basic version is only ranked 3 to 5, Reborn version is 3 to 8, for one thing. For another thing, this has a recovery time of 20 that it adds to every item. I believe this is 4 or so, according to testers, for Reborn. And additionally, it's worth noting that you have to sacrifice a slot. Now, this means completely different things in the different versions. So, like, in Reborn, hard armor is important, but it's, like, lacking some hard armor isn't going to mean that you're constantly getting harassed. In PSP, the way that the AI targeted things on top of the way that armor works meant that if you had somebody that had dramatically lower defense than everybody else, they were basically the kid getting bullied at school for showing up with a Barbie backpack when everybody else was wearing Shaq or something. Like, it was essentially a case that they would get singled out constantly because of the fact that they didn't have that defense. And this was specifically notable on any character that you tried to use the lobber on. Like, oftentimes people will remember that their cleric was getting regularly bullied, more than likely because of the fact that they were using a lobber in their offhand. Unless you used the lobber in your main hand, and basically sacrificed any weapon option whatsoever, you were looking at a case that that unit was more than likely getting regularly harassed. Because again, the AI actually targets stuff differently between these different versions. So this comes up a lot during the No Experience Challenge, whose video should be coming up roughly at the same time as this one. But when it comes to the way the targeting works, in this version, if there's anybody that they can harass, they will. And so when you have those cases, like let's say that the AI is targeting something and it's like, okay, I can deal 100 to that guy, but I can deal 200 to that guy, it will always go for the 200 option. But the thing is, it also counts overkill in this. So even if they're, let's say, going and using a finisher and finishing off somebody at 10 health, but they can deal 400 in the meantime, they seem to still count that as the full 400. In Reborn, I think this was put on either some kind of cooldown timer or, I don't know, maybe something was changed entirely in terms of how they target things. But the AI is far less likely to go and needlessly overkill somebody. Now, the reason that this is relevant is typically units are never more than 2 or 3 attacks away from being dead. And in this case, if it's somebody that's getting harassed every time, this oftentimes meant that the guy using the lobber was just singling themselves out to die whenever he sent them out. Now, okay. To explain what else is weird about this thing, we need to go to the store real quick. See, as I mentioned, the lobber is essentially, well, it takes quite a decently long time to use. So not only are they getting exposed, not only are they sacrificing defense in the form of that shield if they decide to use it as an offhand option, essentially they're going to also have to spend quite a bit of time and money in order to even get that lobber off the ground in the first place. The only one that you can ever purchase throughout the entire game is going to be the standard lobber. Now, in order to get access to the rest of them, you would have to go out of your way to get the crafting books. Now, in order to get these crafting books, the path was long and tumultuous. So, let's say you decide to start off with the lobber +1. This isn't the end of the world. I believe this was from one of the random battles in the palace, or not palace, but in the Elemental Temple side quest. So for most new players, they will never see this. And for most even returning players to that version, they probably never saw this. So the Elemental Temple side quest happens when you clear out the fortresses. Like if you read the news, find out that there's pirates in the fortresses, you clear them out, and then you go read the news again and find out that some religious guy has elemental nukes. So you go talk to said religious guy, and at that point you have a dialogue choice. If you select the wrong option and tell him you're not so sure about yourself, you have permanently locked yourself away from all of those dungeons as well as anything related to them. This includes not only the Apocrypha, which is probably the least important thing of all of those elemental temples, but you lost access to shamans, you lost access to about half the crafting items in the game, and additionally you lost access to a lot of unique pieces of equipment, like the Vanatelli's Talion and Talalik's Bolt. But with that said, what's the deal with the lobber? So this is on one of the random NPCs that's just showing up in one of those fights. The thing is, every one of those temples, roughly floors 3 to 5, will have 2 to 3 crafting books of various varieties. And these are unique drops that only show up on one unit that might never even show up to begin with, and they have a rare chance to go drop a crafting book. Now, many potentially remember having a guaranteed chance to drop these crafting books. That was a change that One Vision made. That was not the case in the PSP version. Additionally, some insist that this is something that you could use back in the SNES version. Neither crafting nor the lobber existed in the SNES version. And I also should probably mention, I'm using SNES as a just kind of a shorthand for SNES, Saturn, and PS1. These things are not different between those three. Anyway, So, let's assume that you found this random NPC. They look no different from anybody else. In fact, in one case, it's literally a zombie that is currently dead once the map starts, that's located in a far corner of the map that you may never even run into over the course of that fight. Simply put, because you probably just ended up throwing them off a cliff or something. There's a lot of just very random locations to these items. And again, remember, this is a unique drop on that particular character. So, assuming you got lucky, because unless you're lucky and have a guide, there's no way you're going to figure out who has what. Because again, even if you farm the map, you don't know that the unit that you're looking for even spawned in the first place. And in many cases, units will simply walk over that loot bag and pick it up. Which actually gets us to another improvement from Reborn, which is that if, for example, a crafting book is stolen in Reborn, you kill the guy, you get it back. In the PSP version, if they picked it up, that item is just deleted. And there was somebody that told me that this was something that was changed from the SNES version. That's not true either. In the SNES version, they also picked it up and deleted it, but they simply lied to you, telling you that it was empty. That was the only difference between the two. In the PSP version, it doesn't tell you anything. They just pick it up, it goes ding, and then it's gone. Okay, so let's assume you found the crafting book, you somehow found the guy, you found the crafting book, you got the drop, and then you have the option to craft the Lobber +1. It's actually at this point that I would like to take a little bit of a side note here to go mention the thrown weapon category in general. This is a weapon category that pretty much entirely just got replaced by the throwing shot grenades in Reborn. And many actually were going and loudly lamenting this when the game first came out, claiming that it was a dumbing down of the whole thing. But let's go ahead and take a quick peek what this actually means. So, looking at those thrown weapons, because I should mention the Lobber is technically classed as a thrown weapon, despite the fact that it does not check the thrown skill, it seems to have been intended to. Like, it seems to have been intended to check the thrown skill and the elemental skills for the purpose of your shot grenades, but presumably they just forgot. They just never tied the two together. This means shot grenades basically don't work in this version. Anyway, so if we take a look, I say basically, no, shot grenades just full wholesale, just straight up don't work in this version. There's not really any ifs, ands, or buts about it, but take a look at these thrown weapons right here. So this is one category that you would essentially be locked into if you decided to go down and use these. They have no finishers across the entire category. The weight, range, damage type, and everything else is switching constantly between these different versions. And then we get to the most important part, which is the fact that you might notice that these are technically comparatively cheap to weapons of their tier, but they're also still very expensive, so what's the deal? These are actually used up every time that you use them. So every time you throw a tomahawk, that tomahawk is just deleted. Effectively, these are a ranged weapon with an ammo count. You'd think that they would have the damage to make up for this, and technically, to some degree, they do. They're relatively high power for their respective tiers. But realistically speaking, these are so expensive that they're pretty much impractical to use. For example, even if somebody doesn't go through the effort of upgrading their Franciscas, we're still talking about potentially a 10 or 20k investment over the course of a fight for somebody to even fund using this weapon at all. And this gets really frustrating in this version, not necessarily because of the weapons themselves, because due to these limitations, nobody really used these weapons, but because the AI constantly uses them to great effect to whoop your ass seemingly out of nowhere, because a lot of times they seem to be running luck builds for the sake of landing crits. So you've effectively got a high power weapon that is going and regularly critting people left, right, and center. And unfortunately, yeah, the AI, just like those previous parry, deflect, and whatever skills, the AI gets a chance to use it, you don't. So that was pretty frustrating to see. Like, here's this cool category, you want to use it, but realistically, if you're using it as your main weapon, it's too expensive to use. If you're using it as your offhand, you're potentially sacrificing so much to be able to use this that it's not even worthwhile. Because again, you're effectively opening up a gigantic gap in your defense. Suddenly that ranged unit is getting completely harassed by other units that can outrange them. And additionally, look at this weight creep between these two. The basic tomahawks, by the time you get to the Francisca, the weight of your weapon has basically doubled. And this is before we even get into the quote-unquote upgraded versions. Because remember that you have to essentially craft an individual one of these every time that you want to throw them. You have to replace them every time they're thrown. And so, for example, when you get to the Pelum, this is going to be, I believe, only available from Deneb's shop, if I remember correctly. But this means that you have to go through 3 crafting menus as well as buying the weapon for about 2 grand every time that you're going and attacking once. And these crafting animations, for the sake of reference, like if we were to make this Mending Seed +3 over here, this is a roughly 6-second animation with no option to create multiple items. This takes a very long time to do in a lot of situations. Which then gets us to Thrown Weapons 2. Because even if we completed Thrown Weapons 1, that lobber itself is effectively going to be something to the tune of 24 crafting animations, and then still only has a roughly 73 to 79% chance, depending entirely on your daily luck, as well as the maximum stats in your party. So the base stats of various things in your party are going to improve your success rate, which means that when a unit dies in this game, you don't actually, we should probably cover the death system too, but you don't actually lose their skills. Realistically, like if a character perma-dies, you don't lose their skills, you just transfer them to somebody else. If they're a story character, they're written out of the story. But what you really lose is their base stats that they gained along the way, which are actually going to lower your success rate whenever somebody dies in this version. It's rare that somebody dies, but it's one of many cases where they tried to tie together way too many systems at one time, and the result is something well beyond Cthulhu levels of fucked. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the next items over here, which is going to be the Lobber +2. And in this case, this is a crafting weapon, or a crafting book, that's actually a little bit of a tease. See, there's a pretty reasonable chance that you get this, if you do get this, before you get Thrown Weapons 1, because this one does not require a extra side quest to do. I mean, technically speaking, you have a somewhat detour over to Palace of the Dead, but most players that play this thing do eventually find Palace of the Dead. The thing is, though, this is on a random beast tamer, again, in a sea of hundreds of units, possibly thousands, depending on if you want to count variations. You have to get lucky and find the one random beast tamer on something like floor 13 or so that will drop this lobber and create a situation where, for example, you break the legs of the dragon standing behind her so that he doesn't immediately pick up this bag. Which actually gets me to another interesting misunderstanding. This is actually more so in defense of the PSP version, rather than just picking on it again. But when it comes to units going and taking particular tiles, this is actually something that we see in One Vision as well, they're not actually going out of their way to steal your loot. It definitely seems like the AI is just going out of its way to be a dick, but it's not actually the case. What's going on is that the AI just kind of has a preference over particular areas where it wants to stand, and so this means that oftentimes if you want to prevent them from stealing your loot, what you want to do is crit them backwards, knock them backwards, shield bash something, just put them into a different tile so that they're not in one of their preferred locations, and then go and kind of kill them off, and then there's a better chance that that unit will not step onto that tile. Or just go pick up your bag immediately, but either way, if you needed to try and make sure that they're not picking it up, you have to achieve the kill right now, and you don't, for whatever reason, let's say you're doing an Iron Man run or something else, you want to save your bag, you have to act right now, you don't have another option, just move them out of the way, you know? Anyway, so, assuming that this happened to you, that you ended up getting this crafting book, we now have another funny situation where you wouldn't be able to even make this without the original crafting book, so bummer if you didn't get it, you're stuck to the basic lobber until New Game Plus, but you actually are going through the same roughly 24-ish crafting animations in order to get this, on top of needing a rare drop from dragons called a Worm Whisker. This is also a rare steal from them, but only on one particular map for whatever reason. Additionally, then, it's only a 58 to 64% chance to even succeed at making this, and if you're thinking, you know, you're just going to go and save beforehand, yes, but we've all had that moment where we crafted a bunch of things back to back, and then forgot to save on the very last and most important thing, and yeah, it gets frustrating. Anyway, so with that said, this created a whole lot of weird complications in this version. For example, with the way that drops are essentially parsed out, with the way that it takes forever to craft certain things, with the success chances of different things, this oftentimes meant that players would actually not have access to the crafting version by the time that they can just get an item naturally. So, like, let's say the worm or the Helm Enchiridion, which is personally something I kind of love as a reference to Ogre Battle 64. Effectively, in this case, you would have a preposterous amount of rare drops to actually make this thing. So, at first, you would need to have armor craft, you'd need to have the Damask Helm +1, you would need to go get an enchanted feather, which was not the most uncommon drop, but still, it's more rare than it is in Reborn. That you're far less likely to have an enchanted feather in this version. I believe they drop from the same enemies, those being griffins in the Farampa Wildwood. For whatever reason, they're just less likely in this version, because I assume, presumably, because of the way that drops are bracketed out. See, in this version, essentially, when you're at certain levels, you kind of move up the bracket over where drops are. This means that the higher level you go, the better your odds of getting rarer things up to a certain point. But at the same time, this means that if you, for example, down level your units to a new class to, let's say, learn some skills in a different way, or you just feel like coasting on easy mode for a while, your drops basically disappear. But the funny part is that if you, for example, achieve something like level 30 or so on any class, you can realistically just go find any random map and you have a pretty good chance to go walk away with a worm scale helm. It's far from unheard of. It's something that a lot of enemies will just carry with them. But in order to make this thing, you not only need 2 crafting books, but you additionally need to have a worm scale, which requires a specific skill in this version on the Dragoon to go use on a dragon to go pick off a worm scale. Funnily enough, Dragon Scale, the skill on dragons, and Dragon Scale, the skill on dragoons, are two completely opposite things. And in the case of Dragon Scale on dragoons, effectively what it does is that it allows you to pull off a scale off of a dragon if they're using the Dragon Scale skill.
Actually, funny little side note here, but back in the PSP version, when it came to whether or not they would actually use Dragon Scale, oftentimes it was completely up in the air due to the fact that most of them carried their respective element of resonance. The funny part is that they typically would spam this freaking all the time, and this is actually one of those other kind of like, oh crap, I get it now moments when somebody wonders why they hated Palace of the Dead back in this version, because oftentimes you'd run into fights where, for example, there's 6 or 7 dragons sitting around in Palace of the Dead, and they're all just repeatedly spamming charged resonance on nothing. Now, this might seem like, oh, they're just going in and they're buffing themselves, but here's the funny part. When it comes to resonance, monster units do not actually have a weapon equipped as far as the game sees it. So this means that they're effectively buffing nobody. When there's these dragon-only maps, they don't have anyone to actually buff. If there was a soldier nearby, you could argue that there was a use for this, but no, they literally were just buffing nothing. They couldn't buff themselves. The averse doesn't affect anybody that's on the other end of the map there. And in some cases, it could be argued that, oh, they're going and trying to boost their way up through prevailing element, which also not only doesn't work in this version, but also is basically not going to be competing with the prevailing dark element in Palace of the Dead. Anyway, just like piles on piles and piles of what went wrong with the resonance. Because on top of all of this, I should mention that the animation to do this thing is like 15 seconds long. So you're just sitting there watching colorful icons rotate on the screen for minutes at a time between turns. It was ridiculous. Okay, that's hilarious. I got interrupted while doing this because my youngest figured out that she could essentially use our laundry chute as a walkie-talkie. Adorable. Anyway, so I made a bit of a mix-up on 2 of the skills here. I don't have the time to figure out where the hell I actually put this thing, but basically, just know at some point in this video I mixed up Spellcraft and Spell Strike for like a sentence. Basically, the general deal is Spellcraft improves spell penetration, so it helps it get past armor. This is basically just damage go up for all intents and purposes, but for the sake of magic stuff, if you don't have this, in a lot of cases, even your higher end spells may just completely bounce off. And then Spell Strike is the one for accuracy, and it's so heavily weighted in this one that if you don't have a Spell Strike at all, you can potentially see 0% odds to hit with every debuff, but then if you do have Spell Strike up to date, you probably are just never missing. It's weird as far as that goes. Technically speaking, you could argue that it isn't always objectively always necessary, but for most situations it is. The weird part is if somebody manages to get late enough in the game, where, for example, they've gone and they've multi-class, like, let's say, just kind of put everybody through their base stat loop multiple times,
Hopefully I'll explain that in this video too. Then potentially they may get their mind high enough that they'll end up having near guaranteed odds to hit regardless. Like, the system in this game is ridiculously chaotic to the point where a few points can potentially shift the entire game on its head. It's actually one of the issues that One Vision had in its balancing for the longest time, of just like, holy crap, 1 or 2 points in vitality completely changes how defense feels. But yeah, it's wild how anyone thought that this was supposed to ever hold together. Anyway, so yeah, know that Spell Strike is typically the thing that you need for any accuracy to happen, and Spellcraft is typically going to be the thing that you need for penetration. Just like with everything in this game, there are going to be exceptions if somebody breaks stuff hard enough. But just so you know, that is kind of the general rule of things. And actually, one more little note here to probably mention. This is typically true for most of the game, but like, for example, in post-game, if you end up getting into post-game, and you, for example, just have completely crunched up stats, there's many cases that things will just completely snap in half, because they were... It's weird, because the post-game, in the early sense, like when you first run into post-game, is just a brick wall that's difficult to break through, and then later on, it just becomes laughably easy. To the point where Coda 4 in the PSP version is a complete nothing burger of a fight, where you can just basically stick one archer with a longbow on any house, and just fire away and one-shot everything along the way. Whereas it's an absolutely friggin' epic fight to the death for the most part in Reborn. So, anyways, that's kind of about that. Just throwing this out here. I would have found it and put it in that spot if I knew where that spot was. All right, take care, y'all. See you later. Bye. Say that 10 times fast. Anyway, I believe that's how it worked anyway. No one ever used that skill. Most of the time, you would just go get a Worm Scale Helm as a drop. You would probably get them for free. Anyway, so you needed not only the scale, you needed the horn, which you would also just get as a random drop, and the whisker, which you would also just get as a random drop, and you needed that original Damask helm that you already made, and then that would give you another coin flip chance to go and craft one of these. Complete pain in the ass. Like, realistically, no one ever did this, but it's weird that it's here. One of many things that gets misremembered. Actually, on that note, I just want to mention, before I forget, one of my favorite moments of progression in this version, which is going to be spears, because I love using spears in all of these, and frankly, the spear progression in the PSP version is some of the most nightmarish shit you'll ever see. So, check this out. So we've got our spears over here, right? Let's go ahead and find a spear user. There we go. And check out this amazing progression right here, right? So, as far as progression goes, you've got a lot of unique options, you've got a lot of weird options. So, for example, upgrading your bronze spear +1. Why would you ever need a level 2 spear? I don't honestly know. Like, to even get a level 2 class is bizarre. Because in order to get a class to level 2, they have to show up at level 2, because there's basically no chance of getting a level 2 outside of repeatedly retreating from the same fight after killing, like, one enemy, and then using that tiny trickle of experience to specifically only get someone to level 2. Completing any map whatsoever with any new class whatsoever typically gets you to 3 or 4. It's weird that this is here at all, but I guess it's just here if you want it or something, maybe? It's odd. Anyway. Great strength bonus off this thing, though. But here's the thing. Here's the kind of funny thing about this. Actually, let's take a quick little side note to detour into level caps, because that's all completely relevant to this spear category. See, level caps were not something in... Whoops. Okay, not sure how long I was muted, but hopefully not that long. Okay, so level caps are not new to Reborn. In fact, they actually were something completely different in every one of these versions. In the SNES version, it would punish you with random battles, where, for example, if you leveled up your units too high, you go into a random battle. Oftentimes, enemies there were freakishly powerful, even though the story itself didn't scale up. So you could curb stomp your way through the story, but anytime you ran into a random fight, you might as well just go and restart your console. Now, that being said, it was kind of funny because of the various different ways to make your units stronger in that original SNES version, levels were really the main way to do it. Equipment really didn't do much more than modify your stats a little bit, and you didn't really have any skills in that version. You had up to three spell slots and a finisher move, which usually was just self-damaging, does additional damage, might have some additional property to it. But it was a very basic implementation of a finisher move. They weren't even called finishers yet, they were just called weapon skills or something. So you didn't really see much out of those. Now, when it came to the PSP version, though, this was completely different. Where effectively you could break the game by ranking up your skills and using them earlier than intended. You could power level your way up to maximum level, but the game would scale up on you past a certain point. Usually not enough of a scale up to prevent you from just curb stomping the main story. But it was enough to the point that you would just randomly show up in the middle of a castle fight. Previous fight was an absolute cakewalk. Now this next fight is completely impossible because now you've gone and saved over your save file. You've walked into a castle, it's scaled up on you, and you now, for example, don't have the skills or equipment to match the enemy team, but you do have the level to match them, putting you in a potentially impossible situation where your weapons don't even penetrate the enemy units anymore. This could be extremely frustrating, and many folks ran into this in the past, typically referring to it as hitting the level 30 wall. There were ways around it, but if this happened to you in the middle of a castle fight, there's a non-zero chance that that save was soft-locked. Now, this again was courtesy of equipment being tied to level, because in this version this also meant that units spawning were also tied to level, but they also didn't have access to crafted equipment. So one of those ways around that level 30 wall was essentially crafting the right pieces of equipment at the right time. At the right time being important there, because for example, having a Zeisted, several levels down from here doesn't matter because it can't penetrate stuff anymore. Even something like the Volge, one of the best weapons, just kind of in terms of longevity in Reborn, even this breach effect didn't really matter this much in this version because its penetration was not up to scratch. Same thing with the Scorpion. This poison effect would in theory be incredible, but again, its lack of penetration meant that it fell off past around chapter 3 or so. It just simply couldn't keep up, and the poison was not enough to be a legitimate threat. And this is coming from somebody that did a run a while ago, exclusively using only spears throughout the entire game, and getting past this level 30 wall was a huge part of that run. In fact, I probably have it laying around here somewhere, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. But, like, Poison was retooled and reborn to do 10% rather than just 10 or 11 damage, which was pretty massive in the grand scheme of things. So stuff like the Scorpion got to stand the test of time, and whereas in this version, it typically just fell right off, and it was just a neat little quirk. What's funny is just due to kind of number thresholds and things, this is why stuff like the Bardish actually kind of had a little bit of a glowing moment in this one. Where just courtesy of finally hitting triple digits on attack, it seemingly had just enough juice to get it into the post game, as well as something like the Damask Spear. Like you'd actually have a pretty noticeable moment on the Damask Spear because you not only got access to a higher attack value, but the Spear +1, which it tended to give it a bit more staying power. It still wasn't super amazing, but it had a cool moment. Now, progression up to this point is fine, but we do start seeing a little bit of a quirk here where the spears start to split, where we have the basic spears and then we have the pikes. Now, this is a really awkward transition for the spear category in general, because this is the first time throughout any of these games that spears have done something other than tiles 1 to 2, right? So what we're seeing in this case is that it's essentially now splitting into this long-range thing. Now, in this PSP version, I believe what they intended was for it to be used with a particular skill. See, in the case of Dragoons, obviously they want to stay as far away as possible, but there were a couple of classes that were given access to barricades. Now, this is one of those skills that I personally always kept on the list, but never ended up using because their strategic usefulness is absolutely bizarre. So, essentially what we're talking about is a skill that will put down a barricade of some description. For the sake of why not, we're going to go ahead and use the Volkaitis for this. We're going to go ahead and throw some stuff on her and throw her into a fight to show you how this thing functions. Because it's a very, very funny, kind of quirky weapon here. So we'll go into the Feral Shore and we'll end up retreating out of this in just a moment. But we'll go ahead and throw Ravenous in here, take off her AI. It's probably also worth noting that you couldn't just turn off the AI in this particular mode. You had to wait until you got into the battle itself. That was the only section in this game that you could actually control the AI from. It had nothing on any other menu. And additionally, if you switch to AI during your initial turn, they actually would lose their first turn in the PSP, which was interesting. Anyway. So we'll go ahead and let them do their thing here real quick. We'll fast forward so that they do what they're going to do. Actually, let's go ahead and not fast forward real quick to show you how slow the arrows fire. Anyway, so So as far as this all goes, a few things to note. A few things to note as far as the barricade skill goes. So it takes 60 TP in this version. For context, TP is essentially an adrenaline meter that builds up over time, and it allows you to go and use skills theoretically whenever you'd like. So let's go ahead and stab over here, and then we'll go ahead and apparently I forgot to put the skill on her. Okay, so we'll go ahead and retreat immediately and then try this again because I did a dumb, and it probably helps to equip the skill that you're trying to show off. Anyway, so okay, so it's worth noting that, yeah, it takes a little bit of a while to go up. Unless the target is exclusively being targeted, they're going to find themselves in a situation that it typically takes a while for them to get up there. Like, you'll notice she was attacked multiple times. She still didn't have the points to go and trigger it. So this included multiple arrow shots at her, as well as, I believe, no, she didn't get melee attacked. It was just multiple arrow shots, as well as natural regeneration, as well as, I believe, she may have Tactician equipped, which causes the meter to go up faster. I bring this up specifically because one of those things that gets misremembered by a lot of folks for this version. Here, does she have Tactician? Yeah, this is with Tac 2. So essentially the best TP generation skill that there is. So what folks will oftentimes misremember about this version is that you could just use those skills whenever. Like, you know, like I used to have a choice when I could go and use my skills, and now they're automatic and they screwed it up. So that's usually kind of where the argument ends up going. Now, what I'd like to point out is that that this skill didn't exactly make it to Reborn for a reason. See, it was bizarre. Normally what people would use this for is actually breaking the AI, because you could surround the AI in barricades and cause two units to hit each other back and forth in order to max out your weapon skill without really doing much of anything. It was annoying to pull off, it didn't work with all weapon categories, but it was technically something that you could do. Now, the thing is, though, as far as the barricades, it seems like their primary purpose was to give you a sort of pike and shot type situation where you could make a wall in which you could attack on the other side, but the other guy couldn't reach you. The funny part is, like, on paper this makes sense in terms of the spears, but the thing is, you get access to this skill way before you get access to spears. Now, like, you get this at 10, you get access to your first spears somewhere around the 20s, right? Now, the thing about this is you might have a few ideas that come to mind in terms of, well, I'm just going to use a crossbow and I'm just going to shoot over it. Are you stupid? You know, like, I'm just going to use my crossbow or I'm going to use my gun. And so, okay, let's go ahead and take a quick thing. Because when it comes to crossbows, they can't actually shoot over it. It counts as a direct prop like anything else, meaning that the only time that you can shoot over it is if you are physically over the barricade already. So like if you pop it down and then you're firing from behind a wall. So you have to be at least a couple of tiles higher in order to have the clearance to be able to shoot over it. You can't just shoot through it. And so if you're thinking, well, then I'm just going to go and use my Fusilier, you know, are you just being dumb? They've got course correction. That was another funny thing about Fusiliers in this version. See, when it came to course correction, in the later version, it actually was a case that it actually properly avoided props. In this version, course correction would hit anything with a health bar that was in the way. So, if, for example, you use course correction on the other end of a wall and there's a unit standing between you and the other target, you would hit the other guy instead. Or if, for example, let's say there was a barricade in the way, you would hit the barricade instead. So even something like course correction couldn't solve this issue. Again, one of many reasons that the skill probably did not come back. It's a little bit too oddly specific. Now, again, as far as it being potentially tied with these pikes, remember that, again, the first pike that you have access to is exactly level 20, apparently. So just a very weird kind of combination there. Now, let's get back to that progression of spears, shall we? So, next up on the spears here is going to be the poleaxe and hash. Now, the poleaxe is essentially upgraded directly into the hash. It's just the earth version of the spear. And this is actually when we get into kind of weird differences when it came to elements. Now, having a particular element overrepresented in one version or another, or in one weapon category or another, wasn't really too significant in Reborn. You didn't have to match your weapon's element for it to be powerful. You didn't specifically have to stick to one particular element. You weren't married to your element. You could change your own element. The weapon's element is fine as it is, and a lot of weapons typically had a high enough bonus on their own that they didn't need your element. At most, you were getting a 30%-ish bonus from going and using that weapon against the right type of target. But in PSP, stuff worked a little bit differently. See, essentially what it did was that your element, your weapon skill, your character's innate racism all got tied together into one neat little bundle, and basically served that out as damage. So, for example, this thing over here, when it's saying that it has Augment Earth, what it's really saying is, please use Augment Earth with me so that I can get my damage bonuses. So, for example, it would check your weapon skill, and it would apply the weapon skill to your attack value. It would check your anatomy skill if you're attacking a human unit, and apply that to your attack value. It would check your augment earth skill, and in this case, add +1 to it, and then attach it to your attack value. All of these were essentially just triple stacked into one big pile of penetration bonuses, and then would be multiplied by something like strengthen. So essentially this meant that you were, for all intents and purposes, just completely married to your element. So if, for example, there was a character like somebody that I built specifically for this run here, or not this save file, but that previous save file, where they, let's say, picked the wrong element, this now means that potentially the best weapon for their particular element, unless they want to go and completely retrain with a new one, which, let me remind you, may take hours to do, it could potentially max out at halfway to the level cap here. So if it's a save file that's going all the way to the end of Coda 4 or something, this character running this hash might as well say goodbye to their odds of actually using this weapon to the postgame. Their only option, their only recourse to actually making a sort of better version of their particular elemental weapon is to acquire the cursed weapon and then essentially re-roll the thing over and over until they get an earth element version. Because in this version, it wasn't tied to whatever element your character had. Each class combination and whatever else had a essentially dice roll chance to become a particular element, a particular damage type, and a particular racial type. There were a lot of dice rolls for creating your cursed weapons in this version. You would have to redo it over and over to get the one that you wanted. And so the only way, for example, to get a earth, kind of an earth, let's say, fencer, like I was using in this case, would be to have the hash and then hope that you can create a cursed spear down the line. Because the earth category just gets cut off right here. Then we get to Divine, which interestingly gets the next two options in the form of the Kolnir Krone and the Holy Lance. Now what's funny is that the Unicorn horn over here is actually going to be one of the better options in this entire category. But why? The Earth one was just completely screwed over and it's got better stats. See, the funny thing about this is despite being weaker than the hash, when it comes to Divine, in terms of units being kind of married to a particular element, Valkyries and Rune Fencers, and the Lord as well, were basically tied to Divine. Because let's look at all the other categories in terms of what they can learn. They can learn their basic missile spells. They can go and they can learn an Instill as well as a Frost Guard. It's worth noting that in Reborn, your Instill basically became automatic, and your ability to resist that particular element was just tied into you being that element. This is kind of important because while these spells existed, no human being that has ever walked this earth has ever cast one of these because of how oddly specific they are. Anyway, you'll notice if we go down the rest of the list, oh wow, they get nothing else. But what if they're Divine? Well, they get access to their missile spells, including the Tier 4 version. They get access to their summons. Actually, I forgot to mention that the previous versions got summons as well. They get their Instill, they get their Light Guard, they also get a Mute, they also get a Haste, they also get a Dispel, they also get access to, where the hell was the other one? We get access to heals 1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as Ease. Apparently I don't have that on this list, but yeah, as well as Ease here. So, yeah, they get access to way more for being Divine than anything else. And it's also worth noting that there were no downsides to elements in this version. So this meant that, yeah, you were probably going Divine. Like, there was no question for you to go anything else. Your options are, do you prefer this other color for the sake of variety, or do you strictly stick with the one that gives you the most options? What's funny, though, is that this Augment Light thing improves their healing, improves their damage, improves everything that they do. And the Spear is one of, if not the easiest spears to actually get a hold of. In fact, arguably easier to get than this Damask Spear over here. Because the Damask Spear, you can get once the full store is unlocked in the post game. You can get the +1 version from the Enchiridion, but the Kolnicrone, or the Kolnicolone, or whatever. This is a misspelling of Unicorn Horn. This thing is available as a random drop as soon as you hit level 28. If you go into Tynemouth Hill, the very first map in the game, there is a very realistic chance that any random rune fencer that you run into can simply be hired to get one of these. If you kill them, there's a small chance that they'll drop it as well. Bear in mind, if you combine Anatomy and Recruit in this version, as well as find enemies like they are, where they're random and have fairly low loyalty, you can just combine the two and just have a near guaranteed chance of a recruit. So these were basically free. You could then downgrade them into replacing that Augment Light that kept them viable with Demonology, which will make it better versus, well, demons. Not particularly useful. You get a slight bump in stats, slight bump in attack value, but realistically you're also losing just as much attack from losing that Augment Light, so yeah, you're taking something like a coin flip chance to go and upgrade it into a downgraded version. But then we get to the next one on the list, and we get the Volkaitos and the Ignis. Now, you'll notice that the Ignis comes very comfortably in Reborn. It's a essentially mid-game fire spear, it's pretty neat, and you'll notice that you don't see the Volkaitos anywhere near this level whatsoever. Because it was never near this level in this version either. This is one of the most baffling series of progression throughout the game, and bear in mind, every weapon category has stuff like this. But this one I particularly noticed because, well, I love spears. Now, the Volkaitos is essentially considered the downgraded version of the Ignis. The main purpose of the Ignis in this version is to give you a non-unique version of the Volkaitos. Because this thing is unique, crafting it makes you a non-unique weapon that you can make multiple of. Weird idea for an upgrade, but whatever. Okay, fine. So you're genericifying a unique weapon. Now, in order to even make this, you have to get the Volkaitos in the first place. So, who do you have to fight? Maybe you have to go fight the fire elements. Maybe you have to, go craft this off of, let's say, a hash or something. Maybe you have to melt down a hash and you make the Volkaitos in a volcano. Maybe, you apply a fire orb to it. No, this is the same location that it's been. Well, it's the same location here as it is in Reborn. Namely, you have to kill Balzaphon in the 4th post-game chapter, in the very final battle, as a rare drop in that particular version. So he has to die during that boss fight, and there's a rare chance that he will drop the Volkaitos. Volkaitos, whatever. At which point, when you get this thing, your odds of crafting the supposed upgrade that's really more of a downgrade is about 30%. For some reason, its level cap, in this case, is 31. That fight, every enemy is like 40. Again, I don't know what this is doing here. There's not that many classes that can even use spears to begin with. What the fuck is the deal with this? Like, why is it like this? Like, this is one of the hardest weapons to obtain in the game, and it's tiered out as being a mid-game weapon. Bear in mind, you can make a better version of this using the cursed weapon over a dozen hours before this, right? You could just go make a fire version of the cursed spear, and it's going to outclass this in everything except for the knockback effect. Just on sheer numbers. And this is like the crappiest version that you could get, by the way. I made the crappiest version using any generic unit from the shop, just to have that for context for the save file. Anyway, so that being said, then we have the one that comes right after it, where we have the Zephyros, a spear that is in every one of these games. It used to be a sword back in Ogre Battle March of the Black Queen, but whatever. Anyway, so the Zephyros is once again, a spear, and in its particular case, we can go ahead and take a look at the classes that can use it, because this gets us to another interesting thing. See, it's a thing that has a Balmy Breeze as its use effect. This is a very, very good spell that is completely useless to the classes listed here, except for the Lord, who probably has better stuff to be doing anyway. Effectively, it requires Spell Strike. See, Balmy Breeze by itself has a next to no chance to hit unless somebody has freakishly high mind. If they don't have that, they need Spell Strike in order for it to hit. If they have the Spell Strike skill, it's basically a 100% chance to disable up to 5 units on the spot. Incredible skill. Not available though on the Rune Fencer Dragoon, the Paladin, the White Knights, or the Juggernaut or Patriarch, or not Patriarch, Hoplite. Sorry. The Lord can get it, but again, he's got better things to be doing. So let's go ahead and take a quick peek over here to the Vartan, because he's actually going to be our next topic. So if we switch over to the Vartan, there we go, and take a quick peek-see over here, and we'll see that we have a Spell Strike in his Learn pile. And there's so many things that kind of counteract each other in this version. Anyway, where are you at? There we go, Spell Strike. And we'll see that we can get up to rank 2 in this particular version. Now, if we get to a dedicated caster like Bane should be, we should see that we should be able to learn higher ranks than that. So let's go ahead and go up here. And we'll see that higher ranks exist, and oh, they do actually have access to that. Okay, so I stand corrected on the Rune Fencer. They are the one guy that actually has a chance to use it. Fantastic, it's good to be wrong. Anyway, so, either way, weird that it's there. Like, it's a weirdly specific thing that it's there. It's cool thematically, but when effectively 2 classes can use this, it's just kind of an odd effect to have on there. It's cool that it has Sleep Proof, though. It's a nice way to make it counter itself and whatnot. What's funny, though, is at the time that you get this, you'll notice its attack power here is actually a downgrade of this version. But 129 for a spear of this type for that late in the game is surprisingly mediocre. Any playthrough that I've ever used this thing, it typically has been a very meh kind of weapon. Now, what's funny then is we immediately hop to the Ventisca, which comes right after it, only a couple levels later, this time as Ice. Remember, you are locked to a particular element in this version, so if you were trying to follow direct progression, my god, you have a lot of grind on your hands. Anyway, it ends up faring a lot better in the Ventisca's case, simply because it has a gigantic strength and dex bonus on there. Well, gigantic strength, kind of modest dex bonus, but still, that is a huge amount of offensive potential that this one simply does not have. Anyway, ironically, despite the fact that this is the one that wants you to be casting debuffs, this technically has a higher mind score attached to it. And additionally, it's a Dragon Slayer Spear that happens to have Draconology attached, meaning that if you are a dedicated Dragoon or something with Dragon Slayer, this thing thoroughly fucks dragons like nobody's business. So, fantastic weapon for that particular thing. Ventisca, great. Zephyros, sad. Now let's look at the Talalix Bolt, which basically does not get as much of a bonus, but it does get an intelligence bonus. This is actually one of the few weapons that does kind of miss out in Reborn's case, seeing as in Reborn there's the oddly specific bug of two-handed weapons not providing intelligence and mind bonuses for the purposes of offensive spells. Now this rarely ever comes up as something that actually matters, because there's almost no two-handed proper weapons that really give you a big bonus. The ones that kind of stick out there are the Wise Man's Staff and the what's the other one? What's the Wise Man's Staff is the whole like red and black one. What the hell's the holy version of that? Lazarus? I think it was Lazarus. And in both of those cases, yeah, those ones kind of suck, but they always kind of did for completely different reasons. But the Talalix Bolt is one of the few that actually misses out, because it has a pretty hefty intelligence bonus on there, essentially being a staff-spear combination of sorts. So it's a pretty okay spear, pretty good for spellcasters as well, making it another spear that's really good for rune fencers. Not so much for dragoons, but hey, whatever. You know, they got the Ventisca, they're already sitting pretty. But this one's a funny little bit of progression, good that it's here. Kind of weird to have a basic spellcasting option this late in the game, but okay, that's fine. It's probably worth mentioning that the last spellcasting spear was way the hell down here with the Balder Spear with its 5 intelligence bonus. So it's been a bit of a while since that niche got to see some love. Anyway, right after that, we have arguably the best spear in the game, the Pavana, which is going to have a nice smattering of different stats, great defensive bonuses, as well as an anatomy bonus, which makes it one of the more usable bonus effects as far as damage is concerned. Comes with an Instill, which is pretty nice for characters that don't get it, like Dragoons. And yeah, overall, pretty solid spear overall, nothing to complain about. And then right above it, we have the Dark Spear, which, you know, the progression on these ones is perfectly well and fine. It's a little weird to have Paralytic Wave on here, since, again, like, one class can use it. Actually, one more note that I should probably mention here, because this also has a Paralytic Wave effect in Reborn as well. Every class that can use Spears in Reborn can get the Spell Strike effect through items. that also requires more asterisks. See, in this version, you needed spell strike, but you needed stacks of it. So like, just using the basic buff from the shop wouldn't give you the spell strike effect at high enough to where it needed to go. Like, spell strike in this one got your odds so high that you basically went from 0% to 100%. But just using the buff by itself might raise it up very slightly, since it's kind of like, let's say you're trying to fill a pool, right? And basic spell strike buff was like throwing a bottle of water in there, and then just full spell strike stacks was just turning on the fire hose. It was that big of a difference between the two. So it either was like it was like many changes in this version. There was just like complete heaven to hell jump between these different versions. Funny part is though, that this spear is one of the most awkward to find in the game, I would argue. Because something like the Bavana has a specific boss fight attached to it. Something like the Bolt has a specific boss fight attached to it. The Bentiska, I believe, can be crafted as well as is a end game drop from some enemies. But the Dark Spear is from a small handful of enemies that were only available in the DLC sections of the Palace of the Dead. So floors like, I believe, like 113 and I think like 109 or so. There were a couple of enemies that could drop the Dark Spear. So it's weird that it's so much more hidden than many of the other ones, despite not really being much of an upgrade. Not necessarily a thing one way or the other. Like, I know the Dark Spear was the one that I went for ultimately in my solo run years ago, but like, it's just weird the location between the two. Really, it's the Volkaitis that's the big kind of a stick out difference here, because by the time you could even get the Volkaitis, you could have had every other spear on this list, and additionally, taking a look at the level requirements for these, we had the further awkward thing that you potentially could be more or less needing to be near max level, which took a lot longer in this one, before you could even use these if you even got a hold of them. So it was such a weird little, like, why are there so many weird restrictions on this moment? Which actually, I just noticed there was one more funny thing I forgot to mention on the Lobber earlier. Okay, Lobber +1 +2, right? Basic Lobber can use it on a ton of classes. Lobber +1 can use it on a far lower selection of classes that are very oddly specific. Now, in this case, I believe what they wanted is, let's say for the Archer, they wanted to have a, like, thrown weapon sniper sword, right? They have the thrown skill. In one hand, they got the Lobber, they're going to throw items, they're going to throw grenades. In the other hand, they got their, like, Wajeli or something, and they're going to go through that thing, right? The funny part about this is, again, the Lobber doesn't check the thrown skill, so those grenades do nothing. But also, like, I don't think anybody ever uses their Archer as an item support, considering that using a thrown weapon gives them less range, less power, less versatility, and worse debuffs than just switching to a longbow, which has potentially up to double the range, has potentially way better damage bonuses. Like, let's go ahead and compare the best weapon in both categories, right? So the Urchin Bolo over here, it's going to inflict leaden. Bows could inflict this with their first finisher. It's going to give them a +1 thrown rank. It's going to give them 3 to 7 range. So this is going to be the best of the best as far as this category goes. At an attack power of 152. Then we go to the longbows, right? And so let's say we go to, what would be... So, like, cream of the crop for bows will vary, but let's go ahead and put together let's say, a Jiggler set, right? Actually, Jiggler set wouldn't be fair because that would be an entire set effect. So let's go ahead and look at the bows and look at the kind of level equivalent. Hold on. To see the level, we need to get somebody that is an archer. Quick, Aircell, we need your archer powers. Okay. So 44. Okay, so the Pajra is going to be its 44 variant. So same attack power, way the hell higher bonuses. Comes with a Instill for an extra 15%. Augments itself, which is basically a better version of the Augment Throne thing. Comes with a immunity on there. 6 to 9 range rather than 3 to 7 or whatever that one was. Comes with offensive bonuses. Comes with accuracy bonuses. Like, and again, this doesn't take ammo. This doesn't have any sort of issues with having to craft it every single time that you're going and using one of them. Recovery time of 47. How does that compare with the Urchin Bola, out of curiosity? Yeah, this one's recovery time of 40, so this is a little bit faster, but weight of 13. Pajra is a weight of 16. So yeah, the Pajra would be slower, but still a significantly longer range, significantly better bonuses overall. And you don't have to spend 5 minutes every time you want to take a shot with a dang thing. Or let's go ahead and say crossbows. What's their 44 variant? Technically, it's a 43, I guess, or you could argue about the riot here. But yeah, stunproof has an instill, has a higher bonus, higher damage bonuses as well. Comes with a good defensive bonus on there, effectively offsetting the fact that you can't use a shield with this thing. Again, like same thing, but rank 5 to, or range 5 to 8. Recovery time is still up there, weight is still up there. But still, like, the thrown weapon category was just super bizarre in this one. But the main funny part about this is that once you upgrade to the Lobber +2 to finally get your range that's somehow still more limited than the Reborn version, because Reborn is range 3 to 8, this one is range 5 to 9. So you have 5 tiles of dead zone with who you need to support with items, meaning that the basic one is arguably a lot more useful than the advanced version. Meaning that the actual, typically most practical version is going to be the range 4 to 7 version over here, which, again, that range got extended in both directions for the Reborn version. I'm assuming that's what this was based off of. But yeah, in that particular context, like, the Lobber +2 is the most bizarre downgrade of all of the bunch, but for some reason, the Rune Fencer loses access to it. I don't know why. They just sort of do. It's just such a strange sudden downgrade. But also, as far as the classes that can equip them, okay, the Archer I can see some use case for. The Rune Fencer, maybe. Like, they're a versatile class. It seems like the kind of weird stuff that they'd get up to. But who in their right mind looks at the Berserker and thinks, yes, item support? Why? In any world would you want that? I guess they were one of the few that could technically offset the damage loss by something like risk management, but like, oh, dude, why? It's so dumb. Or, for example, the Rogue, whose role more or less got shifted to other classes. So, like, the Rogue in this version is probably a whole other thing, all in and of itself to discuss here. Where, like, okay, for now, though, the Lobber, its role with the Lobber got shifted over to the Fusilier. The Beast Tamer always had it, the Lord always had it, the Ranger always had it. For some reason, Princess had it in this one. I really don't know why, like, no one in the right mind would make that decision. Fairies were kind of a fun one, but whatever, we'll just kind of leave that up there. So, with all of that said, let's go ahead and explore one more funny thing, which is going to be... we're going to look at the Rogue in just a second, but I just want to appreciate the utter majesty of everything to do with the Vartan. Because the PSP Vartan is, like, just the most cream of the crop, what the fuck was going on kind of moments in this game, okay? So, first off, best stuff that you could do with this guy. So go ahead and go for a high element airbow. You basically can just go cast your instills more or less for free. You can go ahead and get yourself some nice dex boosting gear. We're just going to go ahead and go for... what are we feeling? Yeah, it would be nice if we could use snipe braces on him, but he can't dedicate in terms of his gear. That's actually one of those other things with this version, that a lot of classes that were meant to be kind of specialists in a variety of different things could absolutely not specialize towards anything. So, for example, stuff like snipe bracers, stuff like nomad bracers, he just couldn't use, because I'm sorry, he can't have dex bonuses as a guy that uses ranged weapons. How could you? So we'll give him Daedalus Gauntlets just to give him that same effect through Anatomy. And we'll go ahead and give him a Jiggle of Dark Coat just kind of for the hell of it. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at our selection of rings. So this actually gets me to another funny thing. Many remember these rings having interesting kind of stat bonuses and effects and whatever else. Funny thing about this is that these rings are basically the basic rings you get at the very start of the game, but they have some other little quirk attached to them. So it's a combination of the Warrior Ring and the Defender Ring, okay? The very first two rings in the entire game. That's all of the special rings and just across the board. This is some placeholder-ass stat allocation, but okay. This was changed in Reborn, but let's go ahead and move on. So, as far as these special rings are concerned, it's worth noting that while they have a lot of different effects, they actually had to take an entire turn in this version to go and activate. This is relevant because of situations like, let's say, hiding your Vartan over in the lava. They would have to activate their lava walk before they actually get there. Or same thing for, let's say, with the Reaver Ring, which was removed. This thing's purpose was more or less taken over by the Luminant Guards. This was a ring that made you steal better. It basically made you steal better crafting components. And realistically, it was available on one guy that was a rare spawn that had a rare chance to drop this rare ring, but only if you were at rank 3 to 5-ish for your steel table. Man. Anyway, moving on though. So as far as accessories go, we'll deal with most of this later. Let's just go ahead and probably go ahead and give him the archer earring over here. And then let's go ahead and take a look at what skills he's got available. Because you'll notice that the Vartan, like in all other versions, is able to learn a few spells. So let's go look at his air spells. He can learn the basic missile spells and... Right, so guy that left me angry comments on one of the videos a while ago, where are all these other spells that this guy could supposedly learn? Yeah, he was still limited to his missile spells back then. So he's still limited to his missile spells, but in order to make him function, we are going to need to give him some skills, right? So we go over here, we replace his stuff over here with air magic, because we need air magic to be able to even use, you know, air magic. So without it, he just simply doesn't get access to it whatsoever. Then we'll go ahead and give him attenuate air to resist air. We'll go ahead and give him augment air to be able to cause attenuate air to even function in the first place. And additionally, we'll have augment because all of his stuff is based off of air. We'll probably take off counterattack because there's basically no reason for him to use it. We would use deflect except for the fact that he cannot deflect using his crossbow, so that's not going to help at all. No person who said that you could use deflect in order to deflect using ranged weapons. No, you couldn't. Don't lie. Anyway, we'll go over here, and then we'll go ahead and give him his Strengthen. So he's already been cheated into a max-type situation, so we'll then go ahead and give him his Strengthen. This will cause him to have a damage bonus as long as the enemy unit doesn't have Fortify. If it has Fortify, it typically will wipe out most of the bonus of this skill. We'll then give him Anatomy, which is actually completely broken in this version, because it will mean that he has an offense and defense bonus against basically everything. Because when it's going and checking things, it just checks if there's a human involved. He is technically humanoid, so he always gets this bonus. Alright, then from there, we'll go ahead and put on, let's say, Fortify, so that if an enemy unit does have Strengthen, they don't threaten him anymore. Fantastic. Then we'll go ahead and give him Field Alchemy, because sure, why not? I'll go ahead and learn the max ranks of Field Alchemy, because everybody can. There's really no reason to ever not do that. So these were limited by a skill that literally everyone can use. It's just a waste of time to not be able to equip this. Anyway, Wapango Winds will inflict Stagger and Airverse. I'm sure glad that we have to get close in order to trigger an ability to make somebody less likely to be hit by those ranged weapons that we had to get close to be able to hit with. Useful. Anyway, Treasure Hunt 1 and 2, we will not be using these because nobody ever did. It just improves the quality of treasure that is discovered. Hilariously enough, this basically means that you have a small chance that maybe that mend leaf you picked up might be a mend leaf +1. Oh no, don't worry, I know, I had to go change my pants too. It's amazing. If you ever look at the drop tables in the guide for the differences between Treasure Hunt, like Treasure Hunt 1 and 2, and just your default state, it's hilariously worthless. Anyway, so at this point, we've basically learned all that we realistically want to use, but we still want him to do some damage with those spells. You know what? If we go and use him right now, he won't be able to hurt anything with his spells. Oh, look, Spell Strike over here. Good. We can use all of those debuffs that he has no access to. Fantastic. Now let's go ahead and put some Spellcraft on there. Oh boy, the one thing he could actually use, he can't use. He can improve his MP generation for the cheapest spells in the game. He can reduce the cost of the cheapest spells in the game. He can increase the size of his max MP bar to further increase the regeneration of his MP bar for the cheapest spells in the game. But, yeah, as far as actually doing damage with them, that's too tall of an order. So he will never use these. Now, for the sake of reference, let's go ahead and throw him into a fight here to show you how well he does with these spells. So he is now boosted in a lot of very specific ways. He should... Is he actually one of those ones that's maxed out? I forget if he's... No, he should have... Okay, this is... after multiple playthroughs. Like, this is a New Game Plus capable unit. Typically, units will start off in the 20 to 30s. Typically, around 30 to 40s is one playthrough. Roughly around the 50s is pretty darn legit. Like, this guy's running a hell of a lot of bonuses. So what's funny is that the only way he can actually improve the power of his spells is to raise his augment air and to raise his anatomy. By going and boosting those, he may have a small chance to be able to actually inflict some damage on something. We'll go ahead and fast forward here real quick. Did not mean to do that, but for the sake of reference, he can near one-shot somebody with his crossbow. He still has access to, again, those same kind of options that he did before. That his Deadshot 4 should be, in theory, roughly equivalent to what he can do with that crossbow. He has to spend MP to cast it. He has a lot of limitations as far as whether he'd be able to do anything with it. And so we take a look at our Deadshot 1. And even with an averse, this is just basically bouncing off of things. This is, bear in mind, with a huge amount of kind of bonuses from his skills themselves. So effectively, right now, he has an artificially high anatomy rank. He has an artificially high collection of stats. He's using endgame equipment, so he's getting augment air from this. He's getting anatomy +2, one of the best bonuses that's possible off the Daedalus gauntlets. Like, his ranks are freakishly high. And again, basic crossbow shot, he's doing potentially up to 4 or 5 times as much, depending on the kind of target. But okay, this is fine. He's just using the basic tier version. So let's go ahead and give him a magic salve right here, which, courtesy of the way the percentages work in this one, the basic salves are near completely worthless, due to the fact that they will never be a percentage that will ever be more than its cheaper counterparts. What an amazing way to design something. Anyway. So we'll go ahead and fast forward here, let some stuff happen. Don't worry, they'll eventually get around to it. Okay, so now we got our Deadshot 2, and it's still basically bouncing off of stuff, because he's just applying his direct bonuses off of his skill ranks. He's not scaling it up off of Spellcraft. We get to Deadshot 3. Okay, it's doing slightly more, I guess. It's almost a threat to some things. It's still quite a lot of MP. It's still a hell of a lot less than his crossbow. Okay, and then the maximum ultimate version that you literally have to go raid hell to get a hold of. And again, he is still not even really a threat. This isn't even worth using a turn on. Okay, so now we go ahead and go about this a little bit of a different way. We go ahead and we give him access to Spellcraft to show you how big of a difference that'll actually make. Since apparently I cannot brain today. Now, bear in mind, this is one rank of Spellcraft, that most other casters would be able to have access to at least 2 to 3 ranks, if not 4 ranks, of this particular ability. Also, for the sake of just comparison here, we'll also turn on Alcolos Winds to give him Air Touch for the sake of comparison, to give a slight boost to his crossbow attack as well. The crossbow attack did not take his action to go and use, the Spellcraft did take his turn to use. Okay, so we're taking some time to get into position, all that. He is not a fast class by any means, but with that Spellcraft, now you'll notice that that has potentially up to doubled his damage against some targets. Against Phalanx, still not so much, but it's still given him a really significant bonus versus a lot of things. Using Spellcraft at that particular rank effectively is just stacking this particular bonus multiple times. Meaning that, yes, he would need Spellcraft to be as much of a threat with the spells as he would be with anything else. For the sake of comparison, again, he can just go over here to any random target and just basically pretty much one-shot him with this thing. So this should hit the... No, it's not a good angle on the skeleton. Alright, let's go ahead and go over here to the Skelly and give him a little bit of a shot right here, and then that should give him a nice, happy, 214 plus 54. Like, to give you an idea over the fact that, yes, he would benefit greatly from Spellcraft if he could actually use it. He still wouldn't be as good as a dedicated caster, because he doesn't have dedicated spell casting equipment, but basically, he's an already ranged specialist class. He comes in as a melee ranged skirmisher type setup. Even a basic shortbow in his hands would do more than these spells. It is an additional function of his class that's pretty much completely worthless. Whereas, for example, using a very similar build in Reborn could see him essentially playing a hell of a lot of different ways, potentially using the AoE effect off of, let's say, the water crossbow over there. Where even is that dang thing? Yeah, the water crossbow is significantly weaker in this one. It also causes you to do acid breath rather than an AoE water splash. But using that AoE Water Splash could effectively cause him to crit. He could essentially crit in a huge area, pick up a magic card, pick up a crit card. Suddenly it's just a huge explosion that's going and damaging a ton of stuff really bad, throwing a bunch of targets backwards and whatnot. Whereas in this version, it was typically just, you pick the thing that does the most damage to one target and then kind of move on. It was kind of more or less about it. Also, hang on, my phone just did a ding. Does that ding means I has work to go do? Or no? Because it certainly feels like no. Nope, still feels like no. Well, that's disappointing. Anyway, let's get back to it. Okay, so other stuff that's interesting about the Vartan. We have, for example, the fact that he can go ahead and, well, this is more so a Canopus more so than Vartan thing. Because we've already said what needs to be said about the Vartan, because it is, funnily enough, a class that has some of the highest movement in the entire game, but due to the fact that it's got some of the highest movement cost in the entire game, they are typically a lot slower than anybody that might be able to, for example, take 2 shorter moves and quicker turns by a pretty noticeable margin. So they wind up being surprisingly slow, despite seeming fast on paper, and despite having a recovery time bonus. But then we get to the weirdness of, for example, being able to switch over to Vartan, or switch over to the Buccaneer, and being able to use a handgun, which is cool, except that he can't learn the skill to use a handgun. As you see right here, he has access to a lot of different things, but he does not have access to fusils. The way that you actually get him to learn how to pull the trigger in this version, please bear in mind that in Reborn, you simply switch him over to a Buccaneer, and he understands how a trigger works. Because, he's a crossbow guy. He's understood how it worked this whole time. Now, instead, what we have to do in this version is you actually have to use the Ogre Blade in order to cause him to be able to learn how to use fusils. See, he can't become a Fusilier. The only class that can learn the Fusil skill is the Fusilier, for whatever reason. All your other Buccaneers will come with the ability to learn Fusils, except for your Lord, who actually has to learn Fusils before he becomes a Buccaneer, or else you've wasted a class mark that you now have to completely redo that side quest in order to get more of, and or go and repeatedly kill the skeletons in that same boss room. I hope you like grinding. Anyway, okay, so let's take a quick step back. So in order for him to learn it, what has to happen is that you have to take a generic unit of any type. You go and switch them over to the Fusilier there. And when they're a Fusilier, they have to learn Fusils. So we're going to go ahead and use her as an example. So they learn Fusils, and then they have to be killed. So they learn the Fusil skill, and they are then killed. At which point, you have to use a different mechanic, wherein... Or actually, no, sorry, I am getting too carried away because this video's gone too long. What you actually have to do is you have to teach them Fusils, and then you have to switch them over to a Warrior, and then you have to use the Ogre Blade in order to transfer their mind into a Hawkman specifically. At which point, once you have access to that Hawkman, you can then kill the Hawkman in order to put them in a state like this. So, once they are dead, once they are deceased, you have the option to spend a Silver Obereth to scavenge their skills onto someone else, which is the only way to essentially transfer the Fusil skill over to a Hawkman, to then transfer into Canopus, to basically have him eat a dead body to have him understand how to pull a trigger. Okay. So yeah, there's no practical reason to do this either, because you could easily get something like the Ixcamilles over here and guaranteed disable a unit with every shot. But hey, it is what it is. Okay, so, let's go ahead and talk about some more just friggin' weirdness, since I'm still waiting for some orders to come in. What is taking so dang long? Okay, at which point, we actually should probably go ahead and load up a different save file. Like, I'm thinking... Let's see, what do we got up here? Let's go ahead and talk about the level 30 wall. I think that's probably another fun one to go over here. So the level 30 wall is such a beautiful monstrosity of design. So, okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at this party right here. So this one's going to be a little bit scuffed, because this was one of these cases where partway through, I think it was, I think I might have, no, this actually might have been the original save file. Okay, partway through, I had accidentally transferred one of them into a One Vision save file, and that was a whole other can of worms. But you'll notice we have the Terenius scales over here without being in New Game Plus. What is the deal? How is this possible? You can only get this in Coda 4. See, what I mentioned earlier about that spear, because you might be thinking, wait a minute, were you lying about that spear? No, I'm still telling you the truth about that spear. Technically, the rule is that you can only get Knight Commander weapons if that Knight Commander dies. The only Knight Commander that can actually die over the course of, well, actually, there's a few Knight Commanders that can die over the course of the game, but they can all drop their weapons if they are killed. The thing is, though, that you specifically have to be above the appropriate level for it to happen. You don't know what that level is, and there's really not much of a way for you to know outside of just kind of trial and error type stuff, right? So this means that, for example, you can get the Terenius scales by killing Andorus. It's a rare chance for him to drop it, but you can get it from him in, let's say, Hanging Gardens. Actually, kind of think of it, this is a New Game Plus file, technically. Alright, whatever. Anyway, so you can get it from him at that point, and that's all well and cool. It's neat that you can do that rather than going into Coda 4 for it, but it's also worth mentioning that the versions in this one are far weaker. For example, the Thunder Breath that you get off this is dramatically less interesting than the Giga Tempest that you, or not even Giga Tempest. What the hell's the one? The recolored Giga Tempest that he's got access on that one. Additionally, the bonuses, stats, everything else on that one are way higher, and there's no level requirement, so you can throw it on anybody. The only version that this has over that one is an immunity to slow. Yeah, that's about as exciting as it gets. Okay. So yeah, the level 30 wall is a bit of an odd duck, because this, again, means that you can get access to some stuff, technically, in this version. Here's the weird design element of this whole thing. The reason that this is happening is because you kind of have the mundane version of the game and then the fun version of the game. The mundane version is what most folks will experience over their first playthrough. It's the one that, like, oftentimes has all these weird moments of, why am I not allowed to have fun yet? Well, you haven't filed your paperwork type stuff, you know? Whereas, for example, as soon as you hit that level 30 wall, then you have stuff like enemies coming in with elemental equipment. You get to make use of augments and things. A lot of your new spellcasting equipment means that a lot of your debuffs are far more likely to hit. You have stuff like getting your maxed out ranks on your one-handed crossbows that are able to just go and one-shot things. Like, Damas Crossbow +1 is probably the best weapon in this entire version of the game. So yeah, it's insanely good. Like, essentially, this is a the way that finishers are scaled in this one means that this crossbow is basically going to be able to one-shot dang near anything with the right finisher. That being not on this list apparently, but yeah, Death Whale. Death Whale is completely broken. Do we explore that one or do we explore the previous topic? Okay, let's keep talking about the level 30 wall. So, what's cool is that, yes, this does allow you to get access to some pieces of equipment a bit earlier. This means that you're more likely to, for example, get access to things like your elemental vests, or get access to weapons that have particularly cool weapon bonuses on there. This doesn't mean that it's happening all the time, and there's also going to be some asterisks to this, but still, it feels like the intended version of the game once you hit that level 30 wall. Getting into that section's a little bit frustrating, though, because all the equipment before it is complete garbage compared to when you get into it, because that's supposed to be the post-game. And that's because when you hit that level 30 bubble, that's when it starts feeling like the SNES version balance-wise, where you're getting access to, well, not balance-wise, but like equipment access-wise, where like you're fighting bosses and they drop their own weapons, where you fight enemy units and they drop cool pieces of equipment, instead of just basic garbage that you're basically getting out of the shop all the time. Because you're basically meant to be struggling on your first playthrough, and then on subsequent playthroughs, you're supposed to still keep having progression. So what they did in the PSP version was that they basically took that progression that was originally there, put it in the New Game Plus version, and then kind of took a step back, and then you're just kind of dealing in the dust, so to speak, for your first playthrough, where you won't have access to a lot of the cooler pieces of equipment, a lot of the cooler skill setups, or anything else. It's just pretty basic stuff. Until, again, you start getting to New Game Plus type stuff, but most people just quit right there. Most people never experience that version of the game. What Reborn does is effectively goes in the other direction, where it takes the late game of PSP and makes it the norm. So you start off with things like parry and deflect, you start off with things like elements mattering right away, you start off with actually caring about your buffs and debuffs and things like that, so that's where a lot of those guarantees come from, that they give you that feeling of having already maxed out without having to worry about the weird limitations of, like, why exactly does my partner not get spellcraft? it doesn't really matter. The fact that they are a water element makes them hit hard with water. They're already sorted. You don't have to worry about the weird arbitrary bullshit, you know? So that that's one of those kind of interesting side steps where they went and looked in completely different directions. Now, one of those other things that could happen is that you could actually have access to classes early, and they would not have access to the stuff that they needed. For example, a necromancer is a great caster. You know what they don't get access to? Meditate. It's a skill that a lot of folks out there have told me before. We're available on so many different classes, and you could totally cross-class this everywhere, and it was just the coolest thing ever, and you could cross-class your meditate over to a knight, and they could use heal 4 all the time. No, you couldn't. Stop lying to me. Meditate was a skill that you could only learn on the Enchantress and Wizard, and then it could effectively be transferred over to a Warlock, a Necromancer, a Shaman, a Princess, Matriarch, or the Astromancer. Now, the thing about this is that you'll notice none of them can learn it naturally. So how the fuck do you get Meditate over to your Matriarch? You remember that Ogre Blade thing we were talking about earlier? Yeah. You gotta go through 100+ floors of Palace of the Dead to go get Meditate on your Matriarch. What the fuck, dude? But yeah. So, effectively what this meant is that you had to either kill an enchantress to go teach Meditate to somebody, or downgrade them out of their class. I have seen at least a dozen folks over the years that have told me that they recruited this necromancer in Chapter 3, only to then realize that they fucked up, and they turned him out of this class and couldn't turn him back into a necromancer, because they didn't have any necromancer marks. And by himself, he's not particularly useful, because when you get him, he basically forgets all the skills he had. That's actually another weird quirk that it's probably worth mentioning. So, over in Reborn, one of those things that gets yelled at about is like, oh, they can only use 4 skills, and they just have those skills that they come with, and I can't just like go and get people with cool, unique skills from the random maps or whatever else. I could recruit somebody that had all these other skills, and I would be so overpowered. Said my friend a few months ago. He has since recanted. Alright, so here's the thing. When you recruit a unit in this game, you'll notice this guy has been through a few fights. He's got some skill points built up down there. He's been used for a couple of fights, essentially trained up from level 1 to level 12. He's gotten enough to be able to afford Spellcraft and Master Undead. Not enough to be able to ever use Master Undead, he's just got Spellcraft to be able to hit stuff. Because the only 4 abilities he came with were Augment Darkness at rank 1, because he forgot any ranks that he had, Dark Magic, Necromancy, and Sidestep. That's it. That's all he remembered. He forgot how to use most of the things that he previously knew. Additionally, if we go over to his magic list, we'll notice, oh shoot, he has no necromancies whatsoever. He was using them during that fight, but he just kind of forgot as soon as we recruited him. This was not a Reborn change. This is just something the PSP version did all the time, but in a way more frustrating manner, because you'll find somebody that has like rank 6 parry out in some random map or something. It's like, wow, that would be super overpowered, and you recruit them, and you know where that parry was? Like friggin' slot 5 or some shit. And guess what? They don't know it anymore. And if you learn parry, if you're thinking it's going to carry over their rank, no. They just forgot they ever had it in the first place. They forget most of the magic they get. They get the top 4 spells that they came with in every category. So he's learned Poison Cloud and a few other ones since then, but typically they only will come with the first few spells that were on here, outside of the super basic stuff. So I taught him a few random things to just have him learn something, but he forgot most of the spells that he had. I believe at the time it would have been anything that was on the higher end, so he probably knew Spell Charge, Drain Mind, whatever else. But he probably forgot most of this up to this point. In some cases, you can recruit spellcasters that just straight up don't have any magic whatsoever when you get them, so that's always fun. And again, remember, he doesn't have Meditate unless he forgets how to be a Necromancer. We additionally can't learn any Necromancies with him, because Necromancy is not just an item that you get, it's a scroll that you have to use up in order to teach somebody something, meaning that we still have to go to Palace of the Dead to get access to any of them whatsoever. Okay, so we are effectively in New Game Plus. We have a completely useless caster over here. We've got a bunch of characters in various states of disarray, and you'll also notice that I also used unupgraded Damask Shortbows on the warriors. Why? Because archers are so ridiculously broken scaling-wise that this is how low of a bar was set to have an archer that felt like a standard archer. And even then, they still end up being pretty ridiculously strong in the grand scheme of things. It felt overpowered to even give them a shield. Like, that's how ridiculous bows are in this version. And a lot of weapons are too, but at the moment that the save file was made, the rumor was there for bows and not necessarily for the other stuff, so it didn't occur to me that the Damascus crossbow was broken as hell too. But oh well. Anyway. So let's go ahead and explore this level 30 wall phenomenon a little bit more, if I can find my spear save file over here. So we're looking for Lance of the Order of Lance a little. Where is it? Please tell me that this still exists. It might not. It's somewhere in here, eventually. Maybe? No? Okay, well, let's try looking in the other direction, shall we? Let's see if it's over there somewhere. Well, shoot. That's disappointing. Let's go ahead and go back to the main menu and see if we can maybe locate it over there, because it could always be in the main screen instead. I don't know for sure. But let's go ahead and take a peek. Oh, actually, one more thing to mention while we're here. The multiplayer mode. I think this was actually repurposed into training mode for Reborn. Multiplayer mode, however, in the original PSP version, was not really multiplayer in the standard sense. You basically took two opponents, like, let's say, whatever this was, and then... Oh, shoot. Well, time to reset the emulator. I loaded a OneVision file. Let's go ahead and load state with whatever this is. So, what would happen is that you would essentially just put two teams against each other, and they would fight it out in whatever their current condition was. If you had set them to AI, you could have two AI teams fight each other, or if you wanted to manually control them, you could just manually control them. So this basically meant that you could do a sort of AI tournament kind of thing if you get creative enough, but there also were a lot of little quirks to this as well. So, for example, when you had them going and fighting each other, you also had to pay attention to the fact that if you had any mend leaves in your inventory, you could potentially just completely screw yourself. So this essentially could lead to a kind of near infinite situation where your units would continuously use completely worthless mend leaves in order to constantly spam heal for 25 health at a time. Additionally, also just for the sake of showing this off, this was from the spear only run ages ago, and you'll notice that this spear can do next to nothing against even basic enemies. Because this, again, was a case where hard armor mattered quite a bit, so as soon as a level fell off in terms of its standard leveling thing, unless you got abnormally high ranks to a lot of your skills and things, you could wind up getting completely screwed. And this is actually, I think, where I finally abandoned this run, possibly. Actually, no, I did ultimately manage to get out of this particular softlock. This is the first time I thought it was softlocked, and then I ended up getting my very first Vita, and this is one of the first save files I ended up continuing on, at which point I ended up getting colonocrones for everybody. Because these guys, due to being locked to both Dragoons and Fencers, can no longer progress in the game during this challenge run, because they don't have any classes to downgrade into to avoid, the stuff that they're currently running into. Actually, no, this was before I even leveled up the Dragoons. This is way earlier in that particular run, huh? Alright, well, anyways, that ended up soft-locking a good bit later. But the thing is, these guys can't upgrade past this point due to progression stuff in the story. So they effectively have these poison spears, but they ultimately can't do much about it. As soon as they get to, let's say, something like Kryptonite, though, actually this was right after the first softlock, if they had stuck to those Rune Fencers, they can't actually progress anymore, because their spears can no longer damage the stuff that's in there, and then as soon as they get into the next fight, they're literally left with nothing that they can compete with anymore. The enemy armor completely resists their damage, the best they can do is poison something, their spells do nothing because there's no, spell bypass for armor or anything. There's a lot of ways that stuff can go wrong. It's also worth mentioning that as far as spells go, these guys basically do 1 damage all the time because they never learned their offensive stuff for that. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this looked like. So this is a good chunk of the way through the game. As you can see, parry has only ranked up 6.3%. Spears have almost gotten up to halfway to max rank, though. We've got Spell Wards, we've got Swiftfoot. Spell Wards typically were used quite a bit back in the day because it also made it so that debuffs would be less likely to hit you. So yeah, these were a nice little universal thing to use instead of, for example, the resist skills, because remember that this version had a ton of resists. So yeah, we got resists all over the dang place, resistance to everything, including resistance to curse. Amazing. You later got more resists that allowed you to resist things like Spendthrift, and these were all typically just like one thing at a time. Like resistance to leaden, seriously. Resistance to fear I get, but the fact that venom and poison are two different resistances is like, is truly just something special. Anyway, it's one of those things that gives the depth of illusion, but it really isn't.
Illusion of depth, not depth of illusion. Apparently I was just going completely dyslexic by this point. Moving on.
Okay. So, ooh. Damn, okay. Well, possible continuation to this whole thing later. I gotta get to work. So, see you in the next chunk then. Oh man, one of those fun things that happens with delivery work is when you go out there, you go try to get the job done or whatever else, and then you show up to pick up a delivery and they're like, no, I'm sorry, the thing's completely impossible. And then customer service tries to argue with you that, no, you're supposed to just go buy it with your own money. I don't care if the customer's card was declined. Like, what? No? You're paying me for this being an impossible order and I'm out of here. Anyway, so let's go ahead and discuss two things. Namely, the death system changes between the different versions, as well as the weird place of crafting and accessories in the PSP version. Okay, so first of all, the death in each of these versions is an odd little thing to bring up. See, death is important to Tactics Ogre. The story has to adapt somehow, and it adapts to death a lot. And the thing is, in the SNES version, people saw these kind of story adaptations a ton. You would constantly see these changes because your characters were constantly getting killed off in weird ways, right? Like just random crits show up, somebody gets wiped off the dang face of the earth. It's good times. It's good times. It's a big old tragedy, you know? Stuff's supposed to be dead. It happens all the dang time. But when it comes to this one, they overcorrected real hard. So in the development for PSP, while I didn't see all of it, what I did see is that they were taking a lot of feedback from people in the Japanese forums. And the thing is, people on forums, they're gonna have opinions, not necessarily gonna be good opinions, but they're gonna have opinions. And one of those opinions was, oh man, people died way too easy. I sure liked how it was in Final Fantasy Tactics. And sure, fair enough. I mean, it works for FFT. You gotta preserve those skills that people have trained up, right? And so they were trying to go for a similar skill system in this one. You gotta rank up your skills. So they bring in the death counter, but they're still worried. Look, they've got so many skills, it's not just a handful of them, and they're ranking them up. Oh, we gotta add more. And so they add the lives system, where a character can die multiple times before they're permanently dead. But geez, I don't know, that's still too much. So now you can scavenge their skills onto somebody else, so you don't have to worry about this stuff dying, so that people aren't just immediately reloading. They did anyway, because frankly you are incentivized to reload, but still, you were, you were kind of incentivized, sort of, to let people die. Here's the funny part about this, though. Not only did this completely not work in terms of making people actually not go back and reload, it kind of made everybody do it more so than ever, because they also decided to double down on another thing, which is rather than, for example, letting units train up, because in the SNES version, if a unit died, you were, like, for some reason, people at the time kept forgetting that Recruit exists. It's existed in every version of this game. It's been the most powerful ability in the series since forever. And for some reason, people forget about it. Like, just freaking nobody used it back then for some reason. So the overall discussion at the time was, oh, dude, I have to restart all of my training on my soldiers from level 1. I have to go to the shop. I have to train somebody a new one. And I don't like grinding up these new people. And that isn't hyperbole. It literally is mentioned in one of the interviews, like, oh, people didn't want to train up their units from level 1, so now, whatever class they are, they're just at that level. That's the important part, because clearly, who needs skills or equipment or anything else? No, dude, they got the level. The funny part is, this is a system that basically shoots itself in the ass, because this is also a one-time bonus. Because they didn't want to lose level-up bonuses either, but they also didn't want to make them too profound, so every class gives you a universal bonus, more or less, that varies slightly in the decimal values of improving them towards the particular specializations of that particular unit. But it's also a one-time bonus. So if you leveled up a unit once, you're not getting that bonus a second time. You can't re-level somebody unless you get a new fresh class to train them with, meaning that every unit that comes later will be worse than the units that came before. This is the most, like, boomer-ass mentality system that you'll ever see, where you literally cannot make better units without new classes, that the older generations will always be better than the younger ones. It's bizarre. So yeah, if you knew about this system, you could exploit the hell out of it to make absolute super units. If you didn't know about the system, you were constantly wondering why it is that these guys were coming in at the same level, but were dramatically, noticeably weaker than the previous ones, even after you trained them up in the same skills, because they had skills, or they had stats that were way lower. So ultimately, auto-leveling them to this particular class did nothing for them. They were behind the curve. They started behind the curve and couldn't get ahead of it by any means. Like, it just was really strange and bizarre and whatever else. And so, what's funny is that this also applies to the crafting as well. So, like, this was a run I was doing a while ago, in which the rules were that there were no revives, no crafting, essentially no accessory slots unless they already came equipped. So, like, they couldn't go to the store, they could only use equipment that was picked up along the way. This was kind of the early version of the, whatever it was, Stubborn Wretch, more or less, but eventually it just became a solo challenge. So yeah, they had next to nothing. Or suboptimal, I should say. But yeah, so essentially this meant that this is one of the only cases that units were actually dying, because they were actually forced to. But the funny part is, due to the fact that they don't have any crafted equipment, due to the fact that they don't have access to accessories to boost their ranks, and for example, they can't go out and grind, this basically meant that these guys would eventually end up getting soft-locked as they reached a brick wall due to essentially just kind of the talent bleed over the course of the party. They also couldn't scavenge stuff, I should probably mention. So, anytime that somebody ended up getting some skill or whatever else, they couldn't go and move it to somebody else. And this created a sort of permanent brain drain effect. Now, eventually, this ended up being a successful run. This was just like one of the early test runs for it and whatnot, if I remember correctly. But yeah, this was one of the few challenge runs in which death was an ever-present issue, just due to the kind of just dramatic drop-off in terms of basically everything. Like the spellcasters couldn't land their dang debuffs whatsoever. The damage dealers couldn't really do much damage to anything. It was just a constant death march straight into nothing. So, would I recommend that particular challenge run to anybody? Probably not, but still, it was just kind of interesting to see how it played out, you know? Ultimately, though, the main point that I was trying to get across here is that when it comes to the balance of the crafting in this one, it was a very unusual deal, because it basically meant that as far as the crafting is concerned, it's one of many systems that was just kind of fighting with itself, where it gave you a completely ridiculous advantage if you were just playing normally, but if you weren't playing normally, you could either potentially break the game or see it as required, just because, well, not using it caused you to more or less get stuck, you know? So what are you? Okay, you're just a cleric. Let's say we have this guy with his double attack here. How much does he do with each of these double attacks? Nothing. He's basically doing scratch damage versus these guys, and he can't even touch Oz. Like, for anyone that's ever complaining that you couldn't do damage in Reborn or something, in Reborn, you could breach this guy, you could switch to a Divine Element or something like that, and you're basically hitting him for a quarter of his health, maybe even half, depending on what abilities you're using. In this version, if you got behind, if you didn't equip the right skills, if you didn't have the right types of weapons or whatever else, if you didn't grind up ahead of time, this could be the joy that you're looking forward to. That you were effectively getting your attacks fire emblemed out of existence. Let's go ahead and get our hammer guy to show you the stark difference between the two, though. Because these guys are all under-leveled, but the levels, as we mentioned before, are not necessarily the most important part. They're a way to get a one-time bonus, so it's an extremely kind of inaccurate way to tell what's going on whatsoever. So spear user over here, okay, they're going to do some stuff to some stuff and still do nothing to him. Okay, fine, all well and good. Let's fast forward a little bit. Our units legitimately get one shot for that one guy that's left a few comments at this point talking about how, no, this totally wasn't a thing back in the day. Yeah, it was way worse, but you'll also notice that as far as how ridiculous the scaling kind of mismatch is for ranged weapons, despite being just as weak as anybody else, this ranged unit is so far the only one that can actually do some damage to Oz. We'll get into more on that in just a moment. Anyway, we'll just go ahead and have her wait for the time being. We have one of the few units with an upgraded weapon. She still can't hit this guy, but on account of having this upgraded weapon, she can at least somewhat scratch him, so that's something. However, our best unit is probably going to be Denim, who's basically got an advantage over everybody else, and in his case, he's able to pretty comfortably fight Oz in this case. In fact, he can outfight Oz in this particular case, just due to the fact that he's going and matching him. Just the fact that he's got matching equipment and whatever else, and a Ring of Vitality, which is technically a bit early in this particular case. I don't remember how we even got a hold of the dang thing, but in his particular case, it would be enough to scale down the damage of this attack to the point that, again, he can basically outfight this boss. Anyway, the funny part about this is that if we then go and, for example, compare giving him a short bow in that particular situation, he would be doing even more than a two-handed weapon, because the Balder short bow is around the point that the scaling for ranged weapons gets so ridiculous that they can just start outpacing everything that's around. It gets very, very silly. So, for example, if we go back to this previous save file over here, and we go ahead and compare two different units, let's go ahead and take most of these guys out of here, and let's make sure that we have this one, let's make sure we have this one, and let's go ahead and throw in Canopus as well as his trainee, because all of these are going to be important. See, what I want to show is the soldier over there. The soldier's got a Lombardia. He's trained to use it. He's pretty decent at using it. He's got the augments to use it. He's pretty reasonably strong. He's been training since the beginning of the game, and he's effectively at the same level as everybody else. The archers have a little bit more because they're constantly getting leaned on, but, you know, it is what it is. So let's go ahead and pick a target here. So let's say this guy. So Ozma here with her double attack. She has taken no additional training. She just sort of came in like this. She can take half the health off of this guy. No trouble. Okay, all well and good. So we'll just go ahead and leave her there for the sake of comparison. She comes in with a rank 3 in Augment Ice. So I don't think she actually even comes in with... no, she has Strengthen, though I believe this was given to her over time. Seeing as, if I recall correctly, she doesn't actually have Strengthen, because I remember potentially killing her off for the level 1 run. Anyway, for the sake of comparison, though, we have Canopus over here, who's essentially doing more than that with a single shot, with a chance to go and disable from a mile away. And effectively does ultimately end up doing more than that, courtesy of that ability right there. Plus can double up his attacks. For the other guy that was yelling at me that you could combine double attack and tremendous shot in this version, no you can't. If you use 2 star moves, one will overwrite the other. Meanwhile, Canopus over here, with his gun, can do slightly more than one of her ice blades. Okay, all well and good. And then we go ahead and compare the guy that's been training with a dagger his entire life. He does 1. Just kind of circle back to how useful that is. Then we get over to this lady with her Balder shortbow. She is bouncing off of this guy's armor because they just scaled up into New Game Plus. So this is around the moment that the Damask bow would want to take over. If any of this is seeming complicated and very random at this point, congratulations, it totally is. Now, this guy that has been training next to Canopus, without Augment Ice, is basically just doing nothing more than scratching this guy. But he does break legs, so I guess that's something. But again, when it comes to Reborn, its idea was to smooth all of the edges of the system out so that it didn't seem completely random and arbitrary when stuff was happening. Because it got weird in this version trying to compare the damage of any of these soldiers, and I forgot to compare Lombardia guy to all of them. Long story short, Lombardia guy basically does the same thing as that bow. Anyway, fine. Looks like also there's more work to go do, but until then, Until then, there's one more little note that I want to mention here. It wasn't actually regarding you. It was in regards to... I completely forgot. Well, skirt. Right. Draconics. Okay, one of those things that gets complained about is that there were some draconics that were removed in Reborn. Like, what happened? Why were they removed? How could they possibly nullify such an amazingly potent school? Okay, it was Detect. Nobody puts down traps in either version of this game. There was like one random enemy in one of the random temples or whatnot that could put down traps. The traps basically did nothing aside from like, hey, look, you got bound to the ground because you stepped on that one tile that one guy obviously set down over there because it only had a one tile range. So you knew exactly where you put them down, where they put them down. Detect allows you to detect where they are in case you were blind. And the funny part is you still specifically have to pick a area, like it isn't a detect across the entire room. It's funny because this particular thing, everything about the Warlock is, remember, coming in from Vagrant Story. And this includes detect traps. However, using detect and Vagrant Story detected the entire room. In this particular case, it's just detecting a few tiles around you. So you basically have to know where the trap is already in order to detect it in the first place. Springboard is still there. Gift of Restoration got buffed to holy frickin' Christ, dude. Gift of Renewal is still there. Dodge Blades, I believe that's still there. I forget. I forget if Dodge Blades and Ballistics are still there. I believe they are. They might not have been. But these are basically True Flight and Dodge. The main reasons that those would have been taken out is because there were a ton of redundant systems in this one. So, like, for example, True Strike, you could get off of a Mercurial File, like you do in Reborn. You could also get it off one of the cards. You could also go and get it off of Lightning Magic. You could also go get it off Draconics. You could also go get it off of a few use item effects. And basically, it was all doing the exact same thing, just kind of depending on which one of those things you happen to have at any given time. There was no functional, like, strategic difference between them. So by just having a Mercurial File, it's like, that's the thing. It's not confusing that you have 7 or 8 different versions of the exact same function. It's just that thing over there. Essentially simplifies without losing any depth, you know? And additionally, if you've seen anything over the course of this particular video, it should be to realize that almost every time the AI was casting debuffs in this version, it either was completely unavoidable or it did absolutely nothing. That was, again, part of that whole, like, heaven or hell balance of the PSP version, in which you basically had, again, moments where either it did nothing or was, like, it's either overpowered or underpowered and nothing in between. If you want to see it done right, like the actual proper middle ground that you would hope would be happening, that's what One Vision's for, that's what it's doing. And in One Vision's case, all that's really happening is that they will essentially cast when they need to cast. Their accuracy will be roughly correct all of the time. Spellcraft is kind of the main thing that broke the system to begin with, because again, it either, like, by default, it had to be so low that you wanted to use Spellcraft to begin with, but then as soon as you use Spellcraft, it just became 100% for basically everything. So instead, what they did was that they made most of those debuffs more prominent off of side effects, so things like secondary effects off of dragons or weapons or things like that. And then one more thing I should probably mention is, as far as the Draconics are concerned, you'll notice the item cost over there on the right. You actually couldn't rely on Draconics for damage and things, despite the fact that they were a more potent version of your basic elemental spells. They required items to cast. They had ammo, and your ammo could never go above 99. You couldn't even achieve multiple stacks, so you not only required a ton of MP in order to use these, you also had to use worm gems on top of this, which meant that you could potentially burn out of your entire stockpile of worm gems over the course of a single fight. On paper, it's really cool. It's like, you know, the runes from RuneScape or something, but in reality, you potentially could burn out of your entire stack pretty much immediately. But it's not just a matter of going back to the store. You specifically have to go to the Palace of the Dead store to go restock on them, and that is exactly as annoying as it sounds. So, yeah. Same thing actually goes for Necromancy in this version. If you ever were wondering why nobody frickin' used Necromancy in this version, same exact thing. Because unlike even warlocks, they're not even using one stock of items. They've just got a bunch of random body parts that they use for stuff. And do you remember which things cost dried eye stems and which things cost shoulder shards? And which things take frickin' testicles? I don't know. I don't remember. You just buy a bunch of them and hope for the best, basically, or you just buy these scrolls and just use those instead because this system is asinine. It's cool in a flavor sense, but in a balance or anything practical sense, it sucks, dude. Like Living Corpse, to turn somebody into a zombie took 75 MP and some shoulder shards for some reason. I guess you were picking them up by their zombie shoulders. And yeah, that is a ton of MP. You're either using an MP item for that, or you're waiting like 8 turns for that to happen. Meanwhile, something like Life Force is 40 in this one. Putrefy is surprisingly cheap, also. Also, Curse versions 1 through 3 all did either Wither, Addle, or whatever the hell the third one was. Those functions are all just combined into Curse 1 and 2 for Reborn, where all of the functions are on Curse 1, and then Curse 2 is just the AoE version. I saw somebody telling me that they removed several debuffs over the course of Curse. Like, no, dude, it just does all of them. Because Wither, Addle, like, these are just reducing bars. You just reduce all the bars. You just curse and you remove some bars. It just does all of it, okay? Okay. Shoot. Right. Well, I gotta go do this delivery. I will be right back after the next one. Okie dokie. So, several hours later, let's go ahead and touch on, let's go ahead and wrap this up with actually one of the points that started this whole bizarre idea in the first place. So, that was actually Zapan of all things, and specifically how Zapan relates to the weapon balance of what eventually became Reborn, but technically PSP as compared with the SNES version. Yes, that's a bit of a loop, but let's get into it. So, the reason that Zapan's brought up specifically is because he actually used to have a unique interaction that I've seen a couple folks kind of proclaim was taken out in Reborn, when in reality it's kind of been less and less of a thing since the SNES version. So, in the original classic version, there was a unique interaction in that one of the only ways that you could get a hold of, if not the only way, to get a hold of the procs, which is a kind of your standard endgame fire axe there, was to acquire Zapan, but specifically to ignore him the first time that he asks, but then to recruit him the second time that he asks, that he'll come in with his upgraded axe. Now, this is weird, because this is one of those moments that PSP stepped in and they're like, oh, I don't know, guys. That's a non-standard weapon. That's got to be put behind several gates. I'm afraid you can't have that. So even if, for example, you scale it up to New Game Plus, even if you wait to recruit him in his second phase, all you get is just kind of slightly more appropriate ranked up skills if you get Zapan later. So, for example, in PSP, the decision is more or less, okay, do you want Zapan right now with his better stats, or do you want to, let's say, have him train himself up in the invisible daycare in the background and just recruit him later? So it really doesn't matter one way or the other. He's one of the few characters that ends up getting enough ranks that it's worthwhile considering to pick him up later rather than doing it yourself. In almost every other situation, it's it's almost entirely not worth it. Some characters will show up with specific ranks that are useful. Others are hilarious. For example, with Olivia showing up with Resist Silence ranked up, which they're basically the only resistance user that's going to be ranked up to any useful degree, which is funny because oftentimes she can potentially come in with a hat that makes her immune to silence anyway. But anyway, whatever. Decisions are gonna decisions. But the funny part about this, though, is that again, this was blamed on Reborn as like, oh, how could they take this out of the game? When it really wasn't. It really wasn't really much more than a basic decision in this one. But in Reborn, it basically was just a case of like, which event do you prefer? It's more of a roleplay type thing. That's probably what the decision was meant to be in the first place. But in that case, it was just given more of a roleplay thing. Babysitting was more so the mindset for PSP. And then it was a fancy axe back in SNES because they tended to give away fancy weapons as a kind of progression marker, whereas they became more so endgame trophies in this version. So like the procs in this version, if you were to come in with it, here we would have to actually go to a completely different save file. Which save file was this? What the hell run was this that we're even looking at right now? Because I don't recognize this. Got some basic staves, got some swords and claymore. What was this? Some kind of warlock run. I think this was some early version of the recruit everything run. Could have been. I don't know. Anyway, let's go ahead and go back to the save to the earlier file there. To take a look at this prox, because the prox again is just an elemental weapon in later versions. So elemental weapons and progression in general was a lot different back in the SNES version. So like in this one, the prox would be here. Who's even an axe user? Again, we can't see some of this stuff until until we actually specifically go to somebody that can go and use it. Here, I think Paladin gets access to axes, doesn't he? No pun intended. Yes, but no. Okay. Fantastic. You know what? Terenius, there we go. You have access to all access. Anyway, we're going to ignore that. Moving on. So yeah, procs in this one would be a 34. The Glamrock would be a 31. Again, hilarious thing that with the Glamrock, you... Actually, I believe the Glamrock, if you switch it over to New Game Plus, I think you can actually get this from Oz earlier than the final fight. Though again, in the Reborn version, these saw quite the glow up, where you got access to their finishers for the first time. Otherwise, those moves were unattainable. But yeah, no, the prox is a weird, odd duck of a weapon. Because once again, you have those cases where most of the classes that have it don't have access to Spell Strike, with exception to Lord, and in the case of this thing, its ability is Misery, which is a, basic debuff. Kind of weird that it's there. Again, just feels kind of like a placeholder. Anyway, whatever. Nothing too particularly special about the procs. You typically will get this going through Palace of the Dead. In Reborn, you'll probably get a handful of them. You might get at least... Well, I say at least. You might get one of these if you're extremely lucky and happen to find, like, the one or two people that go and drop this in Palace of the Dead. Again, one of those weird problems in the PSP version, that for how long it takes you to do damn near anything in that version... You also have the annoying little caveat that there's so many of these things that are just unique-ish drops on some random enemy that's got nothing to do with anything. So you almost never actually run into these unique drops because of how rare they are. Also, we actually have another one of those weird progression cases like before, where you can essentially take the Glamrock and turn it into the Stardust, which is the light version, and you're making it one level higher with a pretty decent I guess upgrade downgrade in terms of recovery time, and then you get rid of an immunity. Who came up with this? Anyway, what I'm actually trying to get at here, you may tell that I am tired as hell by this point, is that there's a lot of weapons that originally had a very different role. For example, the hand axe used to be the only hand axe back in the SNES version. The heavy axe, if I recall correctly, was the highest damage neutral axe, where it's the only one that didn't have an element that basically went all in for just basic regular attack, whereas Balder axes were available a little bit sooner. Let's see, didn't exist. I believe this existed pretty late. Let's see, didn't exist, and then I believe you had just, like, Dragon, and it was just a picture of an axe. Actually, no, it was Earth Axe. It was just called Earth Axe. So it was just this one. So Dragon and Earth Axe were basically the same thing that got split into two different weapons. The Glamrock, you just got from killing Oz. The Procs, you got exclusively from recruiting Zapan on that weird route there. The Boreas, you got from a random Wind God encounter, or Wind God Dragon encounter in Palace of the Dead. Again, remember, it was a randomized dungeon in that one. So you just sort of ran into these guys, and then if you ran into them 4 times, you got all of the Wind God weapons, at which point you could go get the Fire Crest. Let's see. This, I believe, was just the Ice Axe in that one. It wasn't given its Heaven General status. Shaitan's Belova. I think it was just Dark Axe or something. Rune Axe existed, but it was just a regular weapon there. But yeah, there's a lot of them that had a completely different role. Like Zeiston was just Thin Spear in that one, if I recall correctly. And then Trident was essentially a bit more of a late thing. Let's see, Holy Lance, if I recall correctly, was the best spear in the game, except Okie dokie, slight correction here. So the Trident is actually not in the original Tactics Ogre. Basically, its role was more or less fulfilled by the Unicorn Spear, being the best non-elemental spear in the game, more or less. But yeah, as far as the Trident goes, this is from Knight of Lotus in essentially every game onwards. Technically, it existed back in Ogre Battle, but for whatever reason, in Tactics Ogre they took it out. But in the original Ogre Battle, it was just something that mermaids carried around. This came back in Knight of Lotus as well, same thing as just mermaids have it now. And then everybody's just sort of cool with tridents once PSP rolls around. In One Vision, it's a grappling spear, and then in Reborn, it's effectively going to be one of the better 1 to 2 tile spears, physically speaking, but its role is largely diminished in that one. So, funnily enough, actually speaking on that one, so the Trident was the best 1 to 2 tile spear in PSP until you got the Cursed Spear. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is that the Cursed Spear was changed to 2 to 3 range, whereas the other 1 to 2 tile spears got buffed, especially the Breach and Poison ones, in Reborn. So it's kind of interesting that its role sort of got made obsolete in a way, because the debuffs are dramatically stronger in that version. Anyway, so yeah, Trident did not exist in the original Tactics Ogre. That would have been the domain of the Unicorn, and it's weird because the Unicorn then became the Holy Spear from everything then onwards, but it was like the crappier Holy Spear next to the other Holy Spear, unless it was PSP, where it was basically the better of the Holy Spears despite lower stats. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue on. Unicorn, and it was just this thing, so these two were kind of split apart. The Volcatus was always the same thing. Let's see. Except, actually, you could get the Volcatus a bit earlier, because it ended up dropping... I think Balzaphon ended up dropping it earlier, if I recall correctly. Let's see. Dark Spear... I want to say Dark Spear was available a good bit later. Or it might have just been a random drop. Don't remember on that one. Though, one of the ones that saw a massive downgrade for kind of future versions in general was the Dagda's Hammer. So the Dark Deed set actually was very different before. So the Dagda's Hammer in particular was a very interesting case where it was basically the best hammer in the game. But additionally, it had guaranteed mind control, more or less. For whatever reason, Dagda's Hammer was just... it was basically a guaranteed charm or something like that, something along those lines. Rather than the Petroburst that we see right here. And that was the thing. For some reason, it just always hit. Not really sure what that was about. So yeah, in general, oh yeah, these two categories just straight up didn't even exist. Let's see, whips sort of existed, but there was only a handful of them. I mean, I don't know why I'm showing you this when I should just go ahead and pull up the page for this. You know what? Actually, hold on one sec. Alrighty, shoutouts to the old lucked.tacticsogre.com fan site here, because it still exists. Okay, so this was the funny situation of weapons back in the day. So like the warrior sword, which later became the Odiferous Waster in PSP and Reborn, used to be essentially a training sword that made your luck go up on each level up. So your luck was just basically something you could actually raise up as you leveled up, and it more or less created a situation that you would avoid all the time, crit all the time. But yeah, just random dragon just sort of has it in its teeth. You only had one dagger. Well, you actually had a couple of daggers. You had the mini and you had the boulder. I don't think there's any other daggers, but we'll see in just a moment. You had the Desert Blade and the Eiselberg, which showed up on... which showed up as Milden and Gildas's weapons. So those were unique to them. They weren't something that you would just find around. Balder was the spellcasting sword. Ice over here gave you fire resistance and was dropped by a Templar Knight. Funnily enough, this actually worked in reverse later. Like fire gave you a water resistance. In later versions, this would give you an ice resistance. Or in Reborn in particular, it would give you the opposite resistance. Let's see, Dragon Slayer, acquirable by auctioning a red dragon at Critnai Castle. So this is actually another one of those things that technically became the crafting system, at least in mentality, where there are just specifically certain weapons that you mostly got a hold of by going and selling stuff to the store. So like in this case, you sell a red dragon to Critnai, and you can buy yourself one fire sword, and you can do this as many times as you'd like. Or let's see, we got another one that's dropped by Templar Knight in Grimby City. That would just be the Granite. So this is actually the thing that got used as the monkey sword later for One Vision. The Angel Sword, which is the Ambition, which was the rename that it finally got when it came back for the PSP version, because before it was just the Angel. It was Knight of Lotus that caused it to get renamed to the Ambition. We've got the Fafnir, which was Zabos's weapon originally, the Penitent, which was originally Branton's weapon, the Dragon Slayer, which you get for selling a Dark Dragon to Brigantus, so you could get as many Dragon Slayers as you'd like. Nifrit, which always was Martim's weapon. It's one of the only ones that remain consistent here, along with the Zenobia, which is Hamilton's weapon. The Ogre Blade, dropped by a Relics Knight during a random encounter in Hellgate. So this thing is... It's always had the body snatch ability, which just basically lets you transfer your identity and mental stats into another unit, but take everything else from them. So normally what you would do is use this on a lower level unit, so you could kind of re-level as something else. So yeah, it's kind of a weaker version of the zombie mechanic. Anyway, so it's just dropped by a random knight. Like you don't. Palace of the Dead is for the most part randomized. Like there aren't any brackets, there aren't any specific locations that you have to track down. It's just random. You just go in there. You can keep repeating the first handful of levels over and over until you eventually get everything that you want. Palace of the Dead is basically just free loot in the SNES version. Let's see, Notos, found in Hellgate from a random encounter from Wind Guardians, basically the same as all of them. The Balmuk, instead of the Balmung, dropped by a Tiamat, as you do. The Oricon, instead of the Orician, casts the J word you can't say, dropped by a Death Dragon during a random encounter, and this, I believe, was the holy version of a Orb, so that it would just hit the entire map, possibly, so I don't know, I don't remember getting that. The funny part is, even though a lot of these weapons originally had a use effect on there, many of them wouldn't tell you that it had a use effect. So, like, I think the Earth Ring mentions it, but mostly none of the other ones. And then you got the Brunhild, which is gonna be given to you right before the final fight in the game, because there is no post-game in that one. Then you also have the Snapshot spell, which later got renamed to Snapdragon, and these will give you a weapon based off of the unit that it's cast on. So yeah, and it's also worth noting that the Snapshot thing, if I recall correctly, is reusable in this version. So you can just sort of make as many Snapdragons as you'd like. Let's see. To get the Holy Sword, you need to use Snapshot with an Angel Knight. To get the Shadow Sword, you need to use it with a Ghost. Otherwise, the sword you get will match the element of the character that used the Snapshot. Something to note while doing this, though, is that only non-special characters can use the spell, so that's always been a rule. That was not a Reborn thing, as somebody said. You've lost the character for good. It even counts as a casualty on the death toll in the Warren Report, also been consistent from the start. Now to clear up a couple notes, the spell Body Grab can be used by non-special characters, and it changes the body of the user to the body of the target, and vice versa. In other words, the user becomes the target, they keep the user's name, and the target, which has to be an enemy, becomes the user retaining its name. The spell, beginning with a J here, is the same as the spell that Xeris Vepar uses on the battle in B25 of Hellgate. That's Vespel for those that only played later versions. It is a white magic attack which targets one panel and can eradicate undead characters. Okay, so so it is a one-tile version of Star Ion, basically. Alright, then we have the axes. So the original hand axe was just the flanca, and it's the only one-handed, the only one in the entire game. Like, it's the only one-handed axe, full stop. Everything else is two-handed. So Glamrock drops from Oz. We get, let's see, the leader of the Battle of the Rear of Heim is the Ice Axe. This later became the Crash Procura, or whatever it's called. You have the Earth Axe, which has a Dragon Slayer ability on there. You auction an Earth Dragon to William City. I forget which one William even is. You get the Balder Axe, which is, again, your spellcasting variant. You get the Prox, which Zapan just has. You get the Boleas, which later got renamed to Boreas, as you do, the usual R's and L's situation. And they're in a Hellgate encounter, as you do. Then you get a Holy Dragon dropped in Hell's Gate for the Rune Axe. The Heavy Axe is dropped by a Tiamat in Hell's Gate, and again, highest attack power for actually second highest attack power in the game, full stop. Highest attack power of anything non-elemental, and then the Blood Axe is the best one, which also casts Life Suck. dropped by a Succula in Hell's Gate, though funnily enough, this is actually kind of repurposed in a completely different looking weapon that is more or less the exact same thing in Knight of Lotus. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to see how completely different most of this stuff is. But again, to anyone that was ever complaining that oh god, they Reborn fucked it up so hard, you could only get these relics in Palace of the Dead, dude. Most of the stuff you got in Palace of the Dead already. Like, there are some oddly specific things, but who honestly figured, oh wow, a place called William City that's got no information about Earth Dragons or anything. I should randomly go sell an Earth Dragon there, and then go check if they have any extra inventory for an Earth Axe. Nobody's doing that. Nobody did that on accident. Okay, so then we got Spear. Bronze Spear is just Spear. The Zeiston is just the Slender. Then you go immediately, like, those are just your spears for most of the game. And this is actually what's funny here, that as far as progression is concerned, they kind of worked entirely different. Oh yeah, actually, Unicorn and Holy are totally different things in this one. My bad. Okay, well, good to know. But, like, for example, the Baldur Spear is technically, attack power-wise, better than the first two elemental spears, just kind of sitting there right in the middle, and it's not too far away from most of the mid-tier of the entire game. So, like, the Baldur is the best store spear. There is no, like, apparently there is no Trident. That was just my brain hallucinating something. But yeah, the Baldur was the best one in that one. The Trident was the best spear in, or the best generic spear in Knight of Lotus, and then they just sort of incorporated them all together for PSP and Reborn. But yeah, Hero Spear is Zabos's weapon. The Volcano is Salai's weapon. I forgot about that. This isn't even dropped by what's his face. He actually has a sword in this one. This is the spear that. So Salai is Saria. So Saria joins with the Volcano Spear. My bad. Again, there's a lot to keep track of in these games, but like, you see what's going on? Like, even with over a decade in the series and constantly being barraged with the stuff in playthrough after playthrough, I still constantly just mix stuff up. Now imagine if somebody's playing through this thing for the first time and they remember playing it once a decade ago, and that's where most of these misunderstandings come from. That there's just so much shit going on. Anyway, so Leonard's weapon is the Earth Spear in this one, so if he dies, he drops the Earth Spear. The Zepulos is, once again, from the Wind Guardians. The Unicorn is dropped by a Raven Man of a random encounter in Hell's Gate. What's funny is, I think that's why I'm mixing up the two. Like, obviously, they're meant to be two very similar weapons, and the Unicorn is a non-elemental thing, while the Holy Lance is holy in this version. Though it's funny because being holy just makes you resist dark. It doesn't actually help with anything else there, as far as I'm aware anyway. Anyway, so I remember I was looking for the Unicorn and ended up getting the Holy, and I swore that it was just basically those two mixed up or something, that particular playthrough. Anyway, I think that was even in a video somewhere. So yeah, Unicorn is like the spell-casting spear. Evil Spear is dropped by a Gargoyle. Ignis is dropped by a Fire Drake. Once again, all these are in Palace of the Dead, aka Hell's Gate. Alright, and because they've got a whole section on this, let's go ahead and read up. So, Valkyries and Angel Knights specialize in using the spear, but it is a good weapon for any solid fighting class to use. Just in case there's any confusion regarding how to get the Earth and Hero Spears, I thought I'd explain the process a little. In the Battle of B4 of Hell Gate, in the L and C routes, Nibus performs some experiments, resurrecting Zabos and Leonard as the Living Dead, or Death Knights. They are equipped with 2 spears, and will leave the spears when you kill them. Right, there we go. In the neutral game, you do not fight Leonard and Zabos as Death Knights. It is Gildas you fight. Therefore, you cannot get the Earth and Hero Spears on that route. However, you get the Volcano Spear, which you can only get in neutral. To do it, you need to save Salai in the Battle of Fort Badeau towards the beginning of 3 neutral. The battle itself is not that hard, but saving Salai is nearly impossible. Truth. Certainly one of the most difficult tasks in the game, but it can be done. after she is saved, she'll run off because she does not want to work under someone who can justify murdering innocent people. In 4 neutral, after returning to Fida Castle, following their Maruba's rescue, go to Kruzar. Then you can read a rumor in the Warren Report called Pirates in the Fort. After reading it, Fort Kajorga should appear as a red icon on the map. There will be a potential battle scene where a pirate, actually an exorcist, will say something to you. If you choose the proper response, then you'll get to meet their leader, Salai, who will join you, along with a volcano spear and an exorcist named Ereg, who has the poison staff and holy ring. Man, he was always a priest, but it's kind of funny that he used to have all of those fancy relics on him. He's actually, funnily enough, he's actually the only cleric that you recruit that's like maxed out as far as their weapon skills when you recruit Pirate Elrig in Reborn, and he's basically just some random dude in PSP there. Let's see. Actually, one more thing to probably mention here, as far as what they were saying here about saving Salai is nearly impossible. You gotta love when even the main guide for the whole thing is like, yeah, you're not fucking doing that. So the reason for this is exactly what you think. She will pretty much immediately end up just getting dunked on the second the fight starts. So there's a non-zero chance she's dead before you even get a chance to take a turn, and even when you do, you're more or less hoping that she maybe gets a miss or maybe doesn't do something stupid for once. This is actually why in PSP she was given a shield, so that she shield bashes the guy out of the way and runs. And it's why, for example, in something like the best version of of that fight by far is going to be One Vision. Wherein she is just an absolute powerhouse, and like she's still difficult to get in that one, but like she puts up one hell of a fight with her heavy armor and everything. She's basically like every time that a Fallout game introduces a power armored guy, that's basically her in One Vision. That she's there in her heavy armor and heavy shield and everything. But when it comes to, I mean, she's still pretty easy to get in Reborn if you use Griffins. But yeah, dude, this original version was rough. Okay, then we got hammers. So very similar to before, we got the heavy hammer, upgrades into the Balder hammer, and that's about it as far as standard ones go. The Aqua Hammer, you get just randomly in Chapter 3. The Arrows is just the same as all the other Wind God weapons. The Flame Flail is dropped by the leader to the entrance of Heim. The Light is just... Apparently, it just sort of happens. It doesn't even mention where it's gotten. I want to say you get that in Hell's Gate as well. But you'll notice there's a few random exceptions to certain kind of identifying weapons that people have. That's why people remember that you could just get this stuff outside of Hell's Gate, even though most of it is in Hell's Gate. Like Dark Hammer, Hell's Gate. Power Hammer, which is just the Warhammer later, is in Hellgate. Same thing as the Heavy Axe there. You get the Earth, the Sanchin, dropped by a random Templar Knight because it's no longer... what's-his-face's... it's no longer Meatball's unique weapon. You get the Phalanx, which became the Yggdrasil Gnarl, just dropped by one of the random battles in Heim. Okay. Then for claws, they've got next to nothing in this one. So you got the Matau, which is just your basic claws, your ninja claws and stuff like that for most of the game. You get the Thunder Claws from Andorus. Like, yeah, it's that long of a thing. Alright, actually, let's go ahead and read their little entry on hammers here. So note that the light hammer is not a weapon that you can normally get in the game. It does in fact exist though, and one of the zombies you fight in B4 Hell's Gate is equipped with it. Of course, you can't steal it, and there's no way to persuade the zombie and otherwise make it drop the hammer, so there's currently no known way of getting the hammer without using Game Shark. The spell Brain Fry charms a single target with a 100% success chance. That's the Dark Hammer over here. That's what I was talking about earlier. It is a very useful way to either get enemies to attack one another or make an enemy waste turns while regaining their sanity. The next type of weapons is claws. They are all one-handed and comparable to a sword in attack power and style. Ninjas specialize in using the few claws that there actually are in the game. So you get the Matau, which again I don't think you even get this at the store. I forget where exactly you get that. The Thunder Claws are Endorse's weapon. The Blue Claws are from giving a blue dragon to Phydock. The Cat Claws, which are now way later, are just already poisonous by default, dropped by the leader of the Battle of the Heim Courtyard. So just kind of cool to see that they're already poisonous right out of the gate. And then the Galdia, or the Caldia in this case, which looks just like the Iron Fan, which charms targets on hit and is dropped by Zeldora, or Gildora, basically. The Galdia Fan is included in the section because I'm out of all weapon types. It mostly resembles a claw. I mean, if you say so, sure. Okay, and then you got the staff. So you got the Cedar Staff that you start with. It has an attack power, but mostly you're using it for intelligence. You got the Poison Staff, which casts Hazard. I forget exactly what that does. I want to say it's just poison. The Clear Staff, which is a remedy casting thing. We got the Life Staff, which casts Heal. The Balder, which is your direct standard upgrade there. The Wind Staff, which will cast Wind Shot. The Fire Staff, which casts Glow Ball. The Earth Staff, which casts X Zone. And then the Charge Staff. Or actually, quick little note here. You'll notice that there is no Water Staff here. Kind of an interesting omission there. Additionally, these abilities here. So Wind Shot is, Wind Shot. Glow Ball, I believe, is just a Fireball. X Zone, though, is the same as the Earth Ring, which will actually essentially be a Geomancy type of ability. And then you got the Charge Staff, which gives you 25 MP. This ability was later reworked and just given to most of the staves by the time Reborn rolled around, just because how useful regenerating MP was. Okay, then you got the Ripple Staff, which casts Holy Bolt, and then you got Dragon Staff, which casts Abyss. This became the, what is it, the Heaven General Cudgel thingy. Let's see. Hazard is a powerful water-based poisoning attack on one target. Okay, gotcha. Anyway, yeah, X-Zone is a Earth attack that damages and paralyzes a target. The other ones are just kind of standard attacks, except for Abyss, which is a shadow type attack that reduces their HP by a large percentage. So the Abyss was basically the original curse. And then lastly are whips. Let's see. You're probably getting a little tired of this, aren't you? Well, we're almost done. Just a few more weapon types to go. Next in line is the whip. They are almost exactly like spears, except for the fact that they don't produce the shish kebab effect when you attack two enemies that are standing next to each other. You'll only hit the one closer to you. All four whips in the game are two-handed, and Beast Tamers are the guys who master them. So you get the Guard Whip, which is dropped by the leader of the fort in Kadriga in Chapter 2. The Holy Comment, which is dropped by Templar Knight in Grimsby. You get the Rosebud, which is Ozma's weapon, and then the Blood Whip, which is, repeat after me, another weapon from Hell's Gate. Now we move on to guns. When shot, guns have an infinite range. The shot flies in a straight line, obviously, damaging the first thing that gets in its way. Only gunners can actually shoot guns. All other classes just attack with a physical gun, like a sword or gun. Translation, they pistol whip dudes, and it's funny. There are only 3 guns in the game. Only 2 if Kashua survives the events and Banish a Castle. Actually, this is technically not accurate. If she survives and you kill her off in a random battle, you still get the shotgun. So don't worry too much, so don't change too many characters into gunners since they can't change back. So yeah, Rimfire, one-handed pistol, dropped by a Templar Knight in Banish a Courtyard. The shotgun is a two-handed gun. See this for details. What's this? That is very purple. That hurts my eyes. Anyway, what is this? Why is this a helmet now? Go away. And then the rifle, two-handed rifle. Gamp has it when he joins you at the end of Chapter 4. And then attack power is actually really low on these. Now we move on to our second to last type, the bows. I don't mean crossbows, those are a completely different story. Archers tend to use bows the most, as bows provide a good way to attack enemies from behind your main line of defense. Bows are mostly effective when the user is on high ground, shooting down at enemies. The range of their attacks becomes much larger. Some of the strongest bows can even inflict status ailments with their arrows. Note that all bows except for the short bow require 2 hands to use, and here are the mighty bows. So you got the short bows, yeah, you get the one-handed variant. The Balder is two-handed in this one, and gives you its usual intelligence bonus. The Great Bow is your first standard longbow. Then you get the Sandbow is dropped in South Fidek. Light, which is no longer wind in this version, dropped by a guy in West Fidok, which is funny because, again, it's light, it's the wind sprite and everything. It gives you resistance to earth. Anyway. the fire bow, which is dropped by an archer in South Fadok as well. And then West Fadok gives you the ice bow. Apparently, just Fadok is all about their bows. The star bow, which will stun a target, dropped by a Gorgon in Hell's Gate. The chaos bow, which charms a target, is dropped in Hell's Gate. And then the dark bow, which petrifies targets, is dropped by a target in Hell's Gate. And then you got the crossbows. The final type of weapon we're going to discuss is the crossbow. The philosophy behind them is a little different than that of conventional bows. Crossbows are best used by knights and other fighting classes who can get close to the enemy. Crossbows shoot arrows in a straight line, comparable to the shot of a gun. The arrow will damage whatever gets in its way first. This includes the paragun because it works almost exactly the same as a crossbow does. Okay, so you got the crossbow, which is just your standard one-handed crossbow. The paragun, which is later retooled into the stun dart blowgun and all of the various types of blowguns. The Gemini, which is just your standard two-handed crossbow, and then the Saint's crossbow, which is Oshon's weapon. So you get that for getting Oshon. Anyway, so yeah, as you can see, a lot of stuff changed. There was not nearly the sheer amount of equipment that there was in the later versions. And when it came to the ways that stuff changed, a lot of stuff was just in a completely different location. Like, it's not even remotely close between the two of them as far as... No, well, between the three of them, as far as what does what exactly. I mean, even if we take a look at the armor, you have the same old thing where, like, the Stinky set, which is pretty decent in all the other versions, is the lowest defense, lowest attack, whatever else, equipment in the game. It just boosts your luck every time that you level up wearing it. The amounts of armor are... Like, look at this, okay? So, the fairy armor doesn't mention a dang thing in the in-game description about this, but basically it protects against a bunch of random status ailments. Even the guy doesn't know exactly which status ailments, just some of them. You got the angel armor, which regenerates health really slowly. So it's the only regeneration ability in this game. And then you got the ogre set, which is just... or the ogre armor, which is the best armor in the game, and is just dropped by a random dude. Most of this stuff is, again, either Phydock, which, again, for some reason has all of the elemental armors, and then you just have the Grim and Ogre armor, which are slightly different variations of each other, that this is kind of the first instance in this particular game where we have like the low and high variants of this interaction between these, like, between different elements. So you got Grim upgrading into Ogre, and for example, this the equivalent of this in the other ones would be something like the let's say the original Ice Bow turning into the better Ice Bow and stuff like that. Okay, yeah, robes are pretty much exactly the same way, except for, you know, the Robe of Sages is just Olivia's robe that she comes with. But this is where we get to some of the other weird stuff, like the Evil and Holy robes will double your MP regeneration, and both of them are Hell's Gate drops, and then the other ones are just slight intelligence bonuses. So that's, I mean, that's neat, I guess. Let's see. See, to get Deneb to join your troops, buy a lot of stuff from her shop in Chapter 4, which moves from town to town. If you sell her 10 glass pumpkins, which you get from random encounters on the first 30 floors of Hell's Gate, and then recruit 10 pumpkin heads, they don't all have to be in the party at once, she'll join you with some rare equipment, including the fire robe. So again, why you would do this when you're getting double regeneration off of these robes over here, I don't know. Because it's just worse in every conceivable way. Let's see, the Wind Robe is not hard to get, but it can be easily missed. On the Battle of Floor 50 in Hell's Gate, the battle with Beel's Booth, there's some ghosts and skeletons that are equipped with items that are worth getting. Amongst these are the Wind Robe, which all you have to do is persuade the ghost, which has it on. Okay, and then as far as other equipment, same thing with the Warrior Helm over here. Then you have a few other bits and pieces, like the Skull is part of that Dark Deed set from before. Ogre Helmet's part of the Ogre set. But yeah, not much special on these aside from resistances and defensive power and whatnot. Funny note though, the Holy Crown used to be unique to Kashua. She was the only one that could come with the Holy Crown because it was a reference to March of the Black Queen, where you had to use a Holy Crown on an Amazon in order to get a princess. Okay, and then the necklaces, let's see, raises the power of wind in battle, found as buried treasure. So these are just buried treasures somewhere. The blue necklace prevents status ailments, but I don't believe it mentions this. Same thing for the red necklace. But let's see. Black necklace protects the user from all magic, but all magic becomes ineffective. This later came back as the charm in Knight of Lotus. Then you got the evil necklace, which spreads fear, reducing enemy attack power, which is barely noticeable, but it's cool that it's there anyway. And then you got the boots. They make you walk funny. Yeah, you should go get some sleep. Yeah, you got black shield, just like that black choker up there, just prevents you from all magic and stuff like that. And yeah, then you get all of the elemental shields by beating their respective elemental temples, which is a cool touch. You got the gloves, which, funnily enough, will go into the shield slot in this version. It's kind of giving you they're basically just like lighter weight shields, is the general idea. So gauntlets are not worn alongside shields, they're worn in place of shields. And then you got the various different rings, like an undead ring lets you become a lich. You get the holy ring, which lets you cast banish. Funnily enough, this is the sprite that they later reused to make the Reaver ring in the PSP version, which did not come back for Reborn. That was the ring that just made you steal better. You got the evil ring, which casts Abyss, which is that health stealing thing from before. You have all of the elemental rings over here, which are just found as buried treasure. Just basically means when you get to a buried treasure tile, it just rolls for a chance to give you one of these. And then, yeah, warp, float, and wing rings, fire rings, or not even the fire ring, actually, just wing, warp, and float. Will allow you to get all of those unique movement abilities, but they'll also give you some additional casting stats. It's weird that these got downgraded just straight into the dang dirt in the PSP version, and then finally came back in Reborn. The fire ring just let you cast a fireball in this one. It didn't actually let you walk on lava. And you have to get Deneb in order to get the fire ring, which is just ouch. Anyway, yeah, you can find all of the rings as buried treasure with a character of a luck with less than 43 luck. Yeah, the lower your luck, the better your odds of getting some of the fancier items for some reason. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, so hopefully this gives you at least, again, general appreciation over the kind of different ways that certain stuff has kind of played out over time. Because all of these are very, 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 very different between these different versions. Like, original version of the healing items had a grand total of 4 main healing items. It either was 50, 100, 150, or full. And funnily enough, this is actually where we get the numbers for Reborn, where they're 50 plus scaling amount, 100 plus scaling amount, 150 plus scaling amount, and then your full heals and stuff like that. But what's funny is that you also have the Blessing and Joy Stones, which originally were a case where they would bring you back with either 50 or full HP and MP, and you could just find them as a random buried treasure, or you got one over the course of the game of each of these, but you didn't end up getting these pretty much any other way. You couldn't go to the shop. These were extremely rare, so the odds of having them are pretty low. Funnily enough, the original sprite that later became the the Basin of Time or whatever else, the Fortify item, used to be called the Obelin, and it would stop storms. The original Unicorn Horn was called the Nest, and it causes a storm. Whereas the Blowhorn could cause a storm, but it's unlimited uses. Alrighty then. The thing that is your spellcraft item in the later versions, and this one just raises the power of nearby golems. Same thing for the Dragos over here and the Aileron, though I believe this is the only way to actually make your bonus somewhat noticeable, because this basically doubles up the bonus from like Beast Tamers or Warlocks or Dragon Tamers or stuff like that. The Glass Pumpkins allow you to recruit a pumpkin head at Deneb's shop. Really? That's what that used to be for? Huh. Interesting. Okay, well, apparently you had to get 10 of these, and they would allow you to recruit a pumpkin head. That's kind of neat. I actually never once got a glass pumpkin drop in Palace of the Dead. I've completed Palace of the Dead in that version before, too, so I don't know how I've managed to get that unlucky, but alright, apparently that's a thing you can do. Good to know, and yeah. So, oh yeah, an original Fire Seal just gave you resistance to everything by 30%. This was nowhere near as nuts as the just like straight up immortality that you got in Knight of Lotus. Anyway, So that's about that. I'm just going to end it there for the time being because I am absolutely freaking exhausted. And yeah, I'm not sure there's really much more to discuss on this right now. So if somebody wants to see a part two to just continue ranting on with this madness, I will gladly do so. But yeah, I will see you then. Take care.